Rayna Holloway watched in silence as Preston High's three top black students, each with perfect GPAs, vanished from the honors program, without a word. No teacher asked why. No counselor noticed. But Rayna did. And when she uncovered what really pushed them out, proof of a system built to erase students like her, she didn't just speak up. She detonated everything. What she exposed would shake the school, split the town, and reach all the way to the state capitol. But someone powerful was already plotting to shut her down. So the question is, will the truth survive what's coming next? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Preston, Virginia, looked like the kind of town that belonged on a postcard. Red brick homes lined streets shaded by towering maples, and the courthouse clock tower rang every hour like a lullaby from another era. At the town's center stood Preston High School, a sleek, newly renovated building with a manicured lawn and a proud blue sign that read, "Home of the Preston Eagles, Academic Excellence." Since 1964, locals called it the town's crown jewel. Every fall, the school district mailed out glossy brochures featuring rising test scores, Ivy League acceptances, and beaming teachers surrounded by a sea of eager students. Year after year, Preston High was ranked among the top 10 public high schools in the state. The town's newspaper dubbed it the pride of Preston. School board meetings echoed with applause, not questions. No one ever questioned the numbers. No one thought. But if you looked closely at the smiling faces in those brochures, you'd start to notice something. The faces were overwhelmingly white. The celebration of success seemed to orbit a single narrow identity. Behind the polished image, a quieter reality simmered. A story not told in graphs or graduation speeches. A story whispered in hallways, felt in skipped opportunities, and buried beneath polite smiles. A story that lived in the margins. Black students at Preston High didn't complain. At least, not out loud. They were taught early that survival required silence. You kept your head down, turned in your work, and didn't rock the boat. Teachers called them well-behaved, respectful, and quiet. What they didn't say out loud, what they didn't need to, was that those same students were often left off academic team rosters, ignored for leadership roles, and subtly steered away from AP classes. Intelligence was applauded, but only if it came in a familiar package. When Darian Cook, Terrence Boyd, and Lila Winters, all straight-A students, all black, suddenly withdrew from the honors program, no one asked why. Not the guidance counselor, not the teachers who once praised their potential, not even the principal, who was too busy preparing for the school's upcoming Excellence Gala to notice. It was easier to assume they weren't up for the challenge than to ask what pushed them away. The truth was more disturbing. All three students had spent years excelling in silence, winning science fairs without recognition, outscoring classmates who were then chosen for student government, being called articulate in ways that always sounded like surprise. They were tolerated, but never truly seen. Terrence had once scored in the 99th percentile on a state math exam, but was told by his teacher that a leadership role might be too much pressure. Darian wrote a paper on civil engineering that received local attention, only to watch a white classmate with a similar project be invited to present at the school board. Layla, who dreamed of law school, was told her speaking style was too intense for the debate team. They didn't quit because they couldn't handle the work. They quit because the program wasn't made for them. And yet their departure caused no ripple. In a school so obsessed with numbers, no one stopped to question what those numbers didn't show. The system was working exactly as designed, built to reward a very specific kind of excellence, while overlooking every other form it could take. The silence wasn't just from the administration. It came from the white students too, most of whom never noticed the absence. They lived in a different school altogether, a place of encouragement, open doors, and second chances. To them, the honors program was just another step in a ladder they'd always expected to climb. But in the corners of the library, in the shadows of lunchroom conversations, something else was growing. A quiet frustration, a simmering truth. And among those who noticed everything, one girl watched more closely than anyone. Rayna Holloway had never been in trouble. She'd never missed a deadline, never spoken back to a teacher, never given anyone a reason to doubt her. She was, by every metric, the perfect student. But even perfection couldn't earn her a seat at certain tables. She watched Darian, Terrence, and Lila disappear from the program. Watched how no one blinked. She listened to the silence that followed, the way teachers adjusted without a word, and she felt something harden inside her. Rayna had spent years believing that if she worked twice as hard, she'd be seen. That effort could overcome everything. But now, watching the smartest students she knew walk away in defeat, she realized the truth. Silence hadn't protected them. It had buried them, and she wasn't going to be next. But one girl, quiet as a whisper, had watched it all, and she wasn't going to stay silent. The Monday after Darian, Terrence and Layla quit the honors program, the air at Preston High felt different. Tense, yet still pretending to be normal. Teachers avoided mentioning the withdrawals, as if silence could erase what it meant. The pride of Preston banners still hung from the hallways, fluttering slightly from the draft of passing students. But Rayna Holloway noticed the gaps. The empty seats in AP literature, the missing laughter in the lunchroom, the subtle shift that no one else seemed to register. Rayna had always been invisible in plain sight. She was the kind of student who made perfection look effortless. Her notebooks were immaculate, her essays layered with meaning far beyond her years, and her GPA, a perfect 4.0, gleamed like a silent rebellion against everything the system overlooked. Yet for all her excellence, Rayna's achievements somehow never translated into recognition. Teachers praised her work in private but ignored her when award season came around. In staff meetings, her name was often mentioned. She's gifted but quiet, brilliant though not a leader. We need more outspoken role models. Each compliment carried a quiet limitation, a polite wall that fenced her in. To the world she was shy. To herself she was unheard. She'd learned the rules of Preston High early. Speak softly, smile politely, and never make white adults uncomfortable. Her mother, a nurse who had fought her own battles at the local hospital, reminded her of this constantly. They don't always see us the way we see ourselves, baby, she'd said. You've got to make yourself undeniable. Rayna did exactly that, until she realized being undeniable didn't mean being acknowledged. The first crack in her composure came junior year, during the county's Academic Excellence Award nominations. Each department nominated one student. Rayna had been certain she'd get English. Her essays had been read aloud in class for months, but when the English teacher, Miss Callahan, announced the nominee, it wasn't Rayna's name, it was Lindsay Marsh, a bright but inconsistent student who'd turned in her last paper late. Rayna sat perfectly still, her fingers gripping her pencil so tightly it snapped. Lindsay turned and smiled sheepishly, whispering, "You probably deserved it more." Rayna's lips curved in a practiced half-smile, the kind that concealed both hurt and understanding. Because what could she say? That she knew why. That she'd seen the same pattern in every classroom, every hallway, every club election. The next day she overheard two teachers in the hallway. Their voices were low, but the words pierced through. "She's incredibly bright," one said, "but she doesn't speak up much. Lindsay just fits better with the image we want." The image, Rayna repeated silently to herself, as if testing the weight of the word. It wasn't about performance, it was about perception. That night she sat at her desk and opened her laptop. She stared at her grades, her awards from online competitions, no one at school ever acknowledged, her published essay in a regional youth magazine, that none of her teachers had read. The cursor blinked at her. Impatient, she drafted an email to Mrs. Callahan, polite, inquisitive, professional. "Dear Mrs. Callahan, I wanted to ask what criteria were used for the Academic Excellence nomination. I just want to understand how I can improve next year." The reply came an hour later. "Rayna, you're an exceptional student, but the selection also considers leadership and community engagement. You're very reserved, and we want to encourage students who are more involved with peers. Hope you understand." Hope you understand. She did, all too well. Being exceptional wasn't enough when the definition of leadership was coded to mean something else, something she wasn't born into, something she was never invited to perform. Weeks turned into months, and Rayna buried herself in her studies. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was armor, but it came with cracks. She started noticing micro moments she once ignored. When she raised her hand in class, she was often passed over. When she spoke, people interrupted mid-sentence. Her peers borrowed her notes, but didn't invite her to study groups. Teachers complimented her professionalism, but never her voice. Preston High had built an invisible ceiling, and Rayna could see her reflection in its glass every day. Her best friend Mia, a biracial girl who'd transferred from another district, noticed the weight on her. "You can't let them box you in like that," Mia said, one afternoon in the cafeteria. "They don't even realize they're doing it." Rayna looked up from her sandwich. "That's the problem. They never do." "Then make them realize," Mia urged. Rayna smiled faintly. And risk being called angry? Or difficult? I've seen what happens when black girls raise their voices here. Mia fell silent. She'd seen it too. The spring semester brought the rumor everyone was waiting for. The valedictorian shortlist. Only 3 names were said to be in serious contention. Lindsay Marsh, Tyler Kent, and Rayna Holloway. For weeks, whispers followed her down the hallways. It's got to be Rayna, some said. She's a genius. But others smirked knowingly. They'll never pick her, one boy muttered near the lockers. Preston High doesn't want a speech about race at graduation. On the day the shortlist was announced, the entire senior class gathered in the auditorium. The principal, Mr. Adler, stood at the podium, smiling as if the moment itself were a performance. Behind him, a slideshow of student photos cycled across the projector screen. Rayna sat near the front, her heart steady but expectant. She didn't crave applause, just acknowledgement. Each year, Mr. Adler began, we honor 3 of our top-performing students for their academic excellence, leadership, and contributions to Preston High's proud legacy. Her mother was in the audience. Camera ready. Mia gave her a small thumbs up. The first name, Lindsay Marsh. Applause erupted. Rayna joined in, her hands moving automatically. The second, Tyler Kent. Another wave of cheers. Then came the third. A pause long enough for her pulse to quicken. And finally, Adler said, we're proud to recognize Chloe Hartsfield. The crowd clapped again, but Rayna didn't move. She didn't blink. Chloe had a 3.8 GPA, and a father on the school board. The applause faded around her, replaced by the hollow thud of realization. Her mother's camera lowered slowly. Mia's expression turned into something between disbelief and fury. When the assembly ended, Rayna walked out without a word. She could feel eyes on her, some sympathetic, others relieved. In the hallway, she stopped by the trophy case. Her reflection caught between plaques engraved with white faces and gold lettering. For a moment, she wanted to disappear completely. But then a flicker of something fierce rose inside her. The kind of fire that doesn't burn out quietly. She had been invisible for too long. And invisibility, she realized, was never safety. It was erasure. The day she was publicly ignored for the valedictorian shortlist, despite having the highest GPA, something inside her broke. The silence after the valedictorian announcement followed Rayna like a shadow. At first, she tried to push it away, bury it beneath schoolwork, routines, and her mother's careful attempts to comfort her. But silence had a way of echoing in Preston, bouncing off the walls of classrooms and into the corners of her thoughts. Something inside her had shifted that day in the auditorium. It wasn't anger at losing the title. It was the insult of invisibility, the realization that her brilliance was acknowledged only when it was convenient, and forgotten the moment it challenged the system's comfort. So she started asking questions. Quietly. Carefully. At lunch, when others laughed and scrolled through their phones, Rayna lingered by bulletin boards, reading lists of club members and scholarship winners. In the library, she flipped through old yearbooks, scanning pages of smiling faces under the captions, Student Council 2018, Honor Society 2020. Page after page, her stomach tightened. White faces. Again and again. Sometimes there'd be one black student, usually standing off to the side, nameless in a crowd. It was like watching history erase itself in real time. One afternoon, she found herself in the school library, surrounded by stacks of old newsletters. The headlines were almost mocking. Preston High celebrates diversity. Inclusive learning for all. Yet the accompanying photos told a different story. The diverse faces were the same handful of Black and Latino students, recycled each year like tokens of inclusion. Mia, sitting across from her, noticed the growing pile. You planning to build a fort out of hypocrisy? Rayna barely looked up. Something's off, Mia. I can feel it. Off how? She slid a stack of papers toward her. Look at this. National Honor Society, 5 years straight. No black inductees. Student Council, none. And AP enrollment? I checked the class rosters on the school site. Less than 2% black students, in a school that's 18% black. Mia frowned. You're kidding. I wish I was. It was like connecting dots in an invisible map. Patterns no one wanted to see. Every department, every club, every merit-based system mirrored the same quiet exclusion. When Rayna approached her history teacher, Mr. Harlan, to ask about the AP class demographics, he gave her a patient smile. We don't look at race when placing students, Rayna. It's all about qualification. But what if the qualifications are being filtered unfairly? She asked gently. He chuckled. You're overthinking it. Focus on your own path, you're doing fine. Doing fine. The phrase hung in her chest like a weight. The more she looked, the clearer it became that Preston High's excellence was built on erasure. The system didn't punish black students outright. It simply made it harder for them to exist in spaces that mattered. Counselors forgot to recommend them for honors programs. Teachers unconsciously pushed them toward easier electives. Awards committees looked for familiar faces. Preston High didn't have to say you don't belong. It just never gave them a reason to believe they did. That night, Rayna sat at her computer until her eyes blurred. She opened spreadsheets, district records, and archived newsletters. She copied names, dates, percentages. It was tedious, but she felt driven by something deeper than curiosity, an ache to prove she wasn't imagining it. By midnight, she had compiled 5 years' worth of data. The pattern was undeniable. Black students weren't underperforming. They were being systematically excluded. The next morning, she printed the documents, neat stacks of hard evidence that turned whispers into facts. She walked them down to the guidance office, her palms damp with sweat. Mrs. Keene, the school counselor, smiled as Rayna entered. Rayna, always nice to see you. What's up? I just wanted to show you something, Rayna said, setting the papers on her desk. Mrs. Keene adjusted her glasses. What is all this? It's data, Rayna said, keeping her tone calm. About our school's programs. I've been going through old records. I think there's a problem. Mrs. Keene flipped through the pages, her brow furrowing. A problem? I don't think black students are being represented fairly in honors programs, leadership roles, or awards. The numbers. Now hold on, Mrs. Keene interrupted gently. I'm sure there's no intentional bias here. These things just happen sometimes. It's coincidence. Coincidence. The word stung more than she expected. But it's been happening for 5 years, Rayna said quietly. That's not random. Mrs. Keene sighed. The kind of sigh that ended conversations before they began. Rayna, you're one of our best students. Don't get distracted by things you can't control. Focus on your future. Colleges love students who stay positive. The conversation ended there, but inside something sparked. A tiny flame of anger, not the loud, explosive kind, but the kind that burned slow and steady, impossible to extinguish. As Rayna walked down the hallway, the posters for Preston's Academic Excellence Gala mocked her from the walls. Celebrating leaders who inspire. She wondered how many leaders had been chosen not because of inspiration, but because of comfort. That evening, she spread the documents across her bedroom floor. The papers looked like a crime scene, every statistic another piece of evidence. Her mother peeked in, worry creasing her face. You're still working, baby? Rayna nodded without looking up. I think I found something important. Her mother stepped closer. Important how? Rayna hesitated. The school's not what people think it is. It's like they've been pretending everyone has a fair shot. But they don't. Her mother's expression hardened slightly, a mixture of concern and pride. If you're right, you can't fight this alone. They'll find a way to make you look like the problem. I don't care, Rayna said. Someone has to say something. Her mother studied her for a long moment. Then say it right. Make them listen, not just hear you. Those words echoed in her head long after her mother left the room. Make them listen. She gathered her papers into a single folder and stared at the Preston High logo, printed at the top of each page. The school's motto, knowledge, integrity, excellence, seemed suddenly hollow. She thought about the counselor's soft condescension, the teacher's blind spots, the photo spreads with smiling faces that erased her existence. Preston High didn't just ignore its black students. It erased their excellence and called it meritocracy. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the folder in her backpack. The evidence was undeniable. But now came the hardest question: what to do with it? Rayna looked out her bedroom window at the dark outline of the school beyond the trees. Somewhere in that building were the faces of every student who had been made to feel small, unseen, replaceable. For a moment she imagined walking into the principal's office, dropping the folder on his desk, and demanding answers. But she knew how that story ended. Dismissal, denial, polite smiles. She needed to be smarter, louder, but in a way they couldn't silence. The next morning, as the first bell rang, Rayna stood by her locker with the folder clutched tight against her chest. She took one last breath before heading toward a place no one would expect her to go. She printed the evidence, and took it somewhere no one expected. The basement of Preston High's library wasn't on any official school map. It wasn't locked, but few students even knew it existed. Tucked behind a service door marked Archives, the space had once stored old textbooks and rusting projectors. Now dust clung to long-forgotten shelves and cobwebs curled around ceiling beams. But for Rayna Holloway, it was perfect, quiet, hidden, and untouched by the politics of the main floor. She arrived early, the fluorescent lights flickering above her. She arranged the mismatched chairs into a circle and placed the printed spreadsheets on the center table like blueprints to a revolution. Every document had been rechecked, footnoted, organized by year. Names were highlighted, racial breakdowns charted in bold. It looked clinical, but every line screamed with injustice. One by one the students arrived. First came Mia, carrying her tablet, and a skeptical glare. Then Darian, who hadn't spoken much since leaving the honors program. His eyes flickered between the papers and the floor. Layla and Terrence followed, nervous but alert. Then came Javier and Luis from the art club, whispering about a teacher who always steered them toward easier projects. Finally, two white students entered quietly, Ellie Jameson from theater, and Zach Turner, a student newspaper editor who had always kept his head down. Rayna closed the door behind them and drew the heavy curtain over the tiny glass window. "This stays between us," she said. "If this gets out too early, they'll shut it down before we can do anything." She handed out the data sheets, watching their faces shift from confusion to disbelief, then something harder, recognition. Layla flipped through hers with trembling hands. "They've really never picked a black student for NHS? In 5 years?" "Not once," Rayna confirmed. "And we make up nearly 1/5 of the student body." Darian stared at the AP enrollment breakdown. "How did no one see this before?" "They did," Mia said quietly. "They just didn't want to." Ellie looked up from the table, her voice low. "I've heard stuff. Like teachers saying certain students wouldn't be comfortable in rigorous classes. I never thought twice about it." Luis leaned forward. "My counselor told me to take graphic design instead of chemistry. Said it was more my style. My little sister wants to try out for debate," Javier added. "She's already being told to stick to visual arts. She's 11. Zach, silent until now, finally spoke. "We've been doing a senior spotlight series. Not one of the black students I recommended was picked. My editor said it was about GPA. But that didn't stop him from featuring Dylan Miller last week. And his GPA is trash." A silence settled over the room. It wasn't empty. It was charged. Rayna stood in the center of it all. "This isn't just a problem, it's a pattern. A system that makes you feel like you don't belong, without ever saying it out loud." "They make us think it's our fault," Terrence muttered. "Like we're imagining it." Rayna nodded. "That's how it works. You isolate people. Scatter their experiences so no one sees the bigger picture. But once you connect the dots, it becomes undeniable." Layla finished. Mia looked around. "So what do we do with it?" Rayna took a deep breath. This was the moment everything could tip. "We expose it. But not just with complaints or hashtags. We make it impossible for them to deny it. We create a report, use real stories and real data, and publish it ourselves." "A manifesto?" Zach asked. "More like a reckoning," Mia replied. They brainstormed late into the afternoon, heads bent over laptops and notebooks. Javier offered to design the layout. Zach agreed to leak it through the student newspaper's anonymous submission feature. Ellie would interview students on background for quotes. Mia would oversee the editing. They'd call it the hidden pattern, how Preston High disappears its students. Each person took a role. Each voice added fuel. And then, just as Rayna was about to assign final tasks, the faint sound of a door creaking upstairs caught her attention. Everyone froze. A hush swept the room. "Did you lock the main library door?" Layla whispered. "I thought I did," Rayna answered, her stomach sinking. Footsteps. Light. Cautious. A shadow passed across the stairwell above. Rayna rushed to the curtain, peeking through the gap. It was Bryce Heller, senior, varsity tennis, son of the PTA vice president, known for his smug confidence and strategically timed participation in diversity events. He was always friendly, and that way people are when they want credit for noticing you. And he was walking away, slowly, like he had heard more than enough. "Guys," Rayna turned back to the room, heart pounding. "We've got a problem." Mia's eyes narrowed. "Who?" Rayna's voice dropped. "Bryce. I think he heard us." Darian cursed under his breath. Of course it had to be him. Javier stood. You think he's gonna snitch? I don't think, Rayna said. I know. Everyone began gathering papers, shoving laptops into bags. The sense of urgency turned thick. We have to get ahead of this, Mia said. If he tells the admin, they'll discredit us before we even publish, Rayna said. Turn it into a student conduct violation or a misinformation issue. Terrence clenched his fists, not with rage, but with helplessness. They'll make us the problem. Rayna's mind raced. She looked at the printed data, the highlighted charts, the testimonies written in raw paragraphs. This was their proof, their story. But now, it was also a target. We meet again tomorrow, Rayna said firmly. Same place, but we don't bring the documents anymore. We work online encrypted, nothing on school Wi-Fi. No emails, no chats. If they want to shut this down, they'll have to fight ghosts. Ellie stared at her. You're serious? Rayna's voice didn't waver. I've never been more serious about anything. Outside, the school bell rang for final dismissal. Rayna walked out last, her eyes sweeping the hallway. Bryce was gone. But the threat he carried wasn't. But the wrong person overheard their meeting and ran straight to the administration. Rayna Holloway sat in the principal's office, her palms pressed flat against the cool surface of the wooden table. The room was quiet now. Too quiet. The ticking of the wall clock punctuated the weight of the ultimatum hanging between her and Principal Adler. Last chance, Rayna, he said, his voice tight with forced calm. Apologize, and we'll forget this ever happened. She looked at him, not with rebellion, but with something heavier. Sadness. Clarity. Resolve. No, she said. Just one word. Small but absolute. Adler blinked. You understand what you're choosing? I do, she replied. But I won't lie to protect a lie. A silence followed. It wasn't the respectful kind. It was the kind that comes before punishment. Adler scribbled something onto a slip of paper, then handed it to the assistant principal beside him. Effective immediately, you're suspended for 1 week pending further investigation, he said flatly. Rayna didn't flinch. She gathered her bag, her voice steady. Investigation into what? Telling the truth? Adler didn't answer. Outside the office, the hallways buzzed with tension. Students glanced at her as she walked, some curious, others quiet with recognition. Her friends waited near the front doors, Mia pacing, Darian leaning against the wall, Layla's eyes already wet. They suspended you? Mia asked, her voice rising. Rayna nodded. 1 week. Maybe more. Darian swore under his breath. They're really doing this. They think if they scare me, it'll stop the rest of you, Rayna said. Layla looked around. What if they're right? They're not, Rayna said. They're just louder right now. That's all. By the time she got home, the school had already called her mother. Mrs. Holloway stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, lips pressed into a line. Rayna braced for disappointment, but instead her mother opened her arms. Come here. Rayna exhaled and stepped into her embrace. I told you the truth hurts more when you're the one holding it, her mother whispered. But I also told you, you don't hide from it. I didn't expect them to come down this hard. Rayna admitted. I did, her mother said. They've been keeping the lid on this pot for years. You just made it boil over. That night, Rayna lay in bed, scrolling through her phone. She hadn't posted anything about the suspension, but the students had. Someone had leaked it within minutes. The hashtags began small. Justice for Rayna. Preston truth. Let Rayna speak. By midnight, her story had spread beyond the school. A student-run blog reposted the leaked report. An Instagram story from a classmate showed Rayna being escorted out of the office with the caption, "This is what happens when black girls tell the truth." The next morning, the energy in Preston shifted. Students arrived wearing all black. A group held signs outside the building before the first bell. Silence is compliance. We see you, Rayna. Data doesn't lie. Some teachers tried to ignore it. Others looked shaken. Inside the school, Mr. Ellison, the English teacher who'd once dismissed Rayna as too quiet, wrote critical thinking is not a crime on the whiteboard before class. In the cafeteria, whispers turned to debates. Some students defended the school, insisting it was all a misunderstanding, but others began sharing their own stories. Times they'd been sidelined, dismissed, steered away from opportunity. Zach, the student journalist, published an anonymous op-ed in the school paper. They say this school is fair. But fairness without self-reflection is just privilege in disguise. If Rayna broke the rules, it's because the rules were already broken. The administration was caught off guard. They had expected silence, compliance, regret. Instead, they got momentum. At home, Rayna's suspension was quieter, but not peaceful. Her phone lit up constantly. Texts from classmates, DMs from strangers, some encouraging, some hateful. "You're ruining our school," one message read. Another warned, "Don't come back. You're not wanted here." She showed the threats to her mother. Mrs. Holloway's face hardened. "You're going to screenshot every one of these. We're not letting this slide." Rayna did as she was told, but each message chipped at her. She wasn't afraid. She was furious. For every hateful comment, there were two that made her want to keep going. But the line between motivation and exhaustion blurred quickly. 3 days into her suspension, she woke up to an email in her mother's inbox. The sender was a name neither of them recognized. Danica West, investigative reporter, WTR News. Subject: urgent media request. Rayna's story. Rayna stared at the screen. "Someone's paying attention," her mother said quietly. Rayna opened the email.
Mrs. Holloway.
"My name is Danica West, and I'm a local journalist following the recent events at Preston High. I've reviewed the leaked data and spoken to several students. I would like to request an interview with Rayna for a developing story about racial bias in public schools. This piece could elevate her voice and spotlight the issue on a larger platform. Please let me know if you're willing to discuss further." Rayna's heart skipped. "I don't know," her mother said, arms crossed. News moves fast, and not always fair. Rayna bit her lip, but this might be the only way to force them to listen. Mrs. Holloway studied her daughter. "You want to do this?" Rayna nodded. "I'm not trying to be famous. I'm trying to be heard." Her mother's gaze softened. "Then say it loud enough that they can't look away." They agreed to meet the journalist at a cafe near the local library. The next afternoon, Danica West arrived early, notebook in hand, eyes alert but kind. She didn't waste time with small talk. "I've been reporting on education for over a decade," she said. "I've seen bias, funding gaps, teacher strikes. But what's happening at Preston? This is different. They're calling it a data leak. But what I see, this is a wake-up call." Rayna swallowed. "Then help me make it louder." Danica nodded. "Start from the beginning." For over an hour, Rayna told her story. The missed awards, the quiet dismissals, the meeting in the library basement, her refusal to apologize. Danica listened without interruption, occasionally scribbling notes, her expression unreadable. At the end, she closed her notebook. "This isn't just a school story. This is systemic, and people need to see what it looks like up close." Rayna blinked. "So what happens now?" Danica smiled faintly. Now we publish. And Preston won't be able to hide behind banners and slogans anymore." Rayna exhaled deeply. She felt lighter, not because the battle was over, but because it had finally begun on equal ground. Later that night, as she lay in bed, her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a threat. It was a notification. WTR News exclusive. Inside the walls of Preston High. A quiet battle against academic racism. Within minutes, it was shared across parent groups, education forums, and eventually statewide Twitter. Mia called her in shock. "Rayna, you're on the homepage of the station website." Rayna opened the link and stared at her own photo, taken from a school ID next to the headline. She felt her hands tremble. Downstairs, her mother's voice called out, "You better come see this." Rayna rushed to the living room. On the TV, the evening news was playing, Danica's report. Her voice narrating images of Preston High, her story unfolding. And then, a breaking news banner flashed across the screen. State Department of Education acknowledges investigation into Preston High discrimination claims. Rayna's breath caught in her throat. A local journalist contacted Rayna's mother, asking for an interview that could change everything. The morning after the news story aired, Preston didn't wake up to its usual calm. The sun rose on a different kind of silence. Thick, uneasy, charged. A blue and white news van was already parked in front of the school by 7. Its satellite dish pointed toward the sky. The station's logo painted boldly across its side. WTR News, investigating the truth. By 7:10, the camera crew had started setting up. Students gathered in small, anxious clusters on the sidewalk, whispering, pretending to scroll through their phones while secretly watching. Parents in minivans slowed down. some rolling down their windows to catch a glimpse, others shaking their heads in disapproval. Inside the van, the reporter Danica West adjusted her earpiece and checked her notes. She had broken the story that rocked Preston High, and now she was back for part 2. Her voice, calm but sharp, cut through the hum of early morning chatter. "Today we return to Preston High," she said, rehearsing into the mic, "where allegations of systemic racism have sparked outrage across the county. A week after student Rayna Holloway's suspension for exposing racial inequities, questions are being asked, not just about her school, but about the very culture of education in Preston." She paused, looked out the window at the pristine front lawn of the school, and muttered to her cameraman, "They're not ready for this." Inside, the atmosphere was chaos disguised as composure. Teachers pretended to carry on with normal lessons, but the tension pulsed through the hallways like static. Principal Adler's office door stayed shut. The secretary's phone rang non-stop. The district had sent out a statement the night before, insisting that Preston High maintains a culture of fairness and equality for all students, but no one seemed convinced anymore. In the teacher's lounge, Mr. Ellison sat with a mug of untouched coffee. "This is going to get ugly," he said quietly to another teacher. "It already is," she replied. "Parents are calling non-stop. Half of them are demanding Adler's resignation. The other half are saying this whole thing is blown out of proportion." Ellison sighed. "I think the only person who hasn't said anything is the one who started it." Rayna. At home, she sat by her bedroom window, the blinds half open, watching the gray sky. Her phone buzzed every few seconds. Notifications, messages, interview requests. But she ignored them all. The story had spread farther than she expected. National education blogs picked it up. Activist groups shared it. Her name was trending for the first time in her life. And not because of something she had done wrong, but because she had refused to stay quiet. Downstairs, her mother sat at the dining table, scrolling through her phone. "You're on TV again," she said, her tone a mix of pride and worry. Rayna came down slowly. On the screen, Danica stood outside Preston High, microphone in hand. Behind her, students were visible through the windows, watching the scene unfold. "Parents are divided," Danica was saying. "While some believe Rayna Holloway's actions were courageous, others accuse her of defaming a school long celebrated for academic excellence. The district has yet to announce whether disciplinary action against her will stand." Then came a clip. A short, grainy video from the day Rayna had been escorted from the principal's office. A student must have filmed it. Rayna's face was calm, her eyes steady as she walked through the hallway. A voice behind the camera whispered, "That's her. The girl who stood up." Her mother muted the TV and looked at her. "They're calling you a whistleblower." Rayna's lips tightened. That's one word for it. Her younger brother, Malik, only 10, sat at the table with a cereal bowl, frowning. "Kids at school said you got kicked out because you were lying," he said. "One of them called you a troublemaker." Rayna's heart clenched. "What did you say?" Malik hesitated. "I told them my sister's not a liar." His small voice cracked. Then they laughed. Her mother's hand trembled as she set her phone down. "That's enough for today, Malik. Go get your backpack." As he left the room, Rayna looked at her mother. "It's starting to get to them too." Mrs. Holloway nodded. "That's what happens when truth shakes comfort. People attack the messenger before they face the message." By mid-afternoon, the backlash began. Their mailbox overflowed with anonymous letters, some supportive, some hateful. One envelope had no return address, only the words scrawled across the front, "You're ruining Preston." Rayna's mother ripped it in half and threw it in the trash. "Cowards," she muttered. On social media, the divide widened. Posts tagged "What Let Rayna Speak" competed with others tagged "Protect Preston." Students argued in comment threads. Alumni from years past weighed in. Some confessed they had seen the same discrimination. Others denied it ever existed. At the grocery store, neighbors stared. One woman muttered under her breath, "That's the Holloway girl," as if Rayna had committed a crime. By evening, the news van had relocated from the school to their street. Cameras pointed toward their home. Reporters stood near the sidewalk, calling out questions as the Holloways tried to leave for dinner. "Rayna, do you regret sending the data? Do you believe you were treated unfairly? Is this about race or something else?" Rayna froze by the car door. Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't owe anyone an answer right now," she whispered. But Rayna turned, looked straight at the reporters, and said evenly, "This isn't about race or something else. It's about truth. And if truth makes you uncomfortable, that's not my fault. The soundbite aired that night on every local channel. By the next morning, the principal's inbox was flooded. Over 200 emails from parents, community members, even alumni. Some demanded accountability. Some threatened to pull donations. Others insisted Rayna's name be cleared. For the first time in decades, Preston High's reputation wasn't spotless. It was stained. Mr. Adler arrived at school early, greeted by a crowd of reporters and furious parents. He tried to keep calm as he repeated the same line. "We are conducting an internal review." But the cracks were visible now. Teachers whispered. Students filmed him from behind lockers. Meanwhile, in the Holloway home, the tension didn't let up. Milik came home one day, with a torn backpack and red eyes. "They pushed me," he said quietly. "Said our family hates Preston." Rayna crouched beside him, her voice trembling with anger. "Who did it?" He shook his head. "Doesn't matter." "It does," she said. But her mother's hand on her arm stopped her. "No, baby," Mrs. Holloway said softly. "You fight battles that matter. Let this one go." That night, the Holloway home lights stayed on late. The news continued to roll in. Rayna scrolled through hundreds of messages, some from strangers, others from students across the country. One from a girl in Georgia. "Read, I go to a school just like yours. Thank you for saying what we couldn't." Another. "They called me angry for asking why I wasn't picked for honors. You're not alone." Rayna's eyes burned. She hadn't realized how many others were living the same story in silence. Around midnight, as her mother sorted through another pile of mail, there was a knock at the door. A quiet, hesitant one. Mrs. Holloway frowned and opened it slightly. A courier stood there, holding a large sealed envelope, marked with an embossed state seal. "Delivery from Ms. Rayna Holloway." Mrs. Holloway signed and closed the door, her eyes widening as she handed it to her daughter. Rayna sat on the couch, turning the envelope over in her hands. The seal read, "Virginia State Department of Education." Her mother's voice was barely a whisper. "Rayna, what is that?" Rayna carefully broke the seal, her pulse quickening. Inside was a letter on official letterhead. She read the first line silently. Then again, just to be sure. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a reprimand. It was an invitation. "Ms. Holloway, the Department of Education has opened a preliminary inquiry into the allegations raised regarding Preston High School. We would like to invite you to testify as a student representative during our equity hearing next month." Rayna's breath caught. The state wasn't just listening. They were asking her to speak. Her mother sat down beside her, eyes wide. "Oh my God, Rayna, they want you to testify?" Rayna looked up, her voice barely steady. "They're not just investigating the school. They want to hear it from me." Outside, the news van was still idling under the streetlight. The reporters waiting for another quote, another reaction. But Rayna wasn't giving them one. Not yet. Because this story wasn't over. It was only just beginning. An unexpected invitation arrived from the State Department of Education. The letter from the Virginia State Department of Education sat on Rayna's desk like a flame that refused to burn out. Each time she passed it, her chest tightened. She had read it over and over until the words blurred. But the invitation remained unchanged. They wanted her to testify, publicly, on record, as the face of a growing statewide investigation into racial discrimination in public schools. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday at the State Education Building in Richmond, 3 hours away. A formal state review board would oversee the testimony. The proceedings would be broadcast live on public television and recorded for legislative archives. It was no longer just a school issue. It was policy, politics, precedent. Rayna had never felt smaller, or more important. Her mother sat across from her at the kitchen table, watching as she folded and unfolded the letter. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready," her mother said gently, breaking the silence. "I'm not ready," Rayna replied, "but I'm still going." Her mother smiled. "Then we'll do it right." For the next 5 days, Rayna prepared obsessively. She compiled every chart, every quote, every verified number. Mia helped her craft the narrative, shaping raw data into compelling truth. Darian coached her on tone. Layla read her practice statements aloud, so she could hear what they sounded like out in the world. "You don't want to sound angry," Layla advised. "Not because you shouldn't be, but because that's what they'll expect." Rayna nodded. "I want to sound undeniable." The night before the hearing, sleep refused to come. Rayna stood in front of the bathroom mirror, reciting her opening lines. She thought of every student who had been erased, every name she knew, and the ones she didn't. At dawn, she dressed in a simple navy blazer and cream blouse. Her mother tied her hair back, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Speak for every child they never saw." The drive to Richmond was silent for most of the ride, the only sound being the distant hum of the highway and Malik's occasional questions from the back seat, questions Rayna could barely process. By the time they reached the tall glass building that housed the State Education Board, the media vans were already lined up outside. A red carpet wasn't needed, just a microphone and a good angle. Journalists crowded near the front entrance, cameras aimed, eyes scanning for the girl at the center of the storm. Inside, the hearing room buzzed with quiet anticipation. At the front sat a long table of officials, board members, policy experts, and one particularly sharp-eyed woman with a silver streak in her hair, Elise Norwood, a former superintendent known for pushing anti-discrimination reforms in Virginia's largest urban district. She was rumored to be working on a statewide equity bill. Rayna was ushered to the witness stand. A small wooden placard read, "Rayna Holloway, student witness." She placed her folder on the table, hands trembling. A clerk approached. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, under penalty of perjury?" Rayna's voice didn't crack. "I do." The room hushed. A red light blinked on. The cameras were live. Rayna opened her folder. "My name is Rayna Holloway. I'm a senior at Preston High School. For 4 years, I've been an honor student. I've never been in trouble, never failed a class, never missed a deadline. But despite that, I was passed over for academic awards, discouraged from applying to leadership roles, and finally suspended for exposing patterns of racial exclusion within my school." She paused, scanned the room, then continued. "In the past 5 years, not a single black student has been selected for the National Honor Society at my school. In that same time, black students made up less than 2% of advanced placement classes, even though we are 18% of the student population." She clicked a button on a USB drive. A slide appeared on the room's large screen, side-by-side charts of enrollment and demographic data. These are not coincidences. These are patterns, and they are not limited to one building or one district. They are happening quietly in schools across Virginia, and no one is tracking them. Until now. She moved to the next slide, screenshots of internal memos, anonymized student testimonials, guidance counselor recommendations with racial patterns in course suggestions. For years we've been told to work hard, follow the rules, and wait our turn. But fairness that only protects some students isn't fairness. It's comfort disguised as policy. She saw Elise Norwood lean in slightly. Rayna's voice trembled now, but she didn't stop. "They told me I was too quiet, that I didn't fit the image of a leader. But when I finally spoke, they punished me. Not because I lied, but because I refused to protect their lie." The final slide appeared, a photo of Rayna being escorted out of Preston High, captured by a student, now seen by thousands. "This is what happened when I told the truth." The room fell silent. Not the kind of silence that dismisses, but the kind that acknowledges. The board chair cleared his throat. "Thank you, Miss Holloway. That was powerful." Elise Norwood was the first to speak. "Miss Holloway," she said softly, "what do you want this board to do?" Rayna didn't hesitate. "Audit every school in this state. Make equity measurable. And stop letting comfort decide whose voices matter." Ms. Norwood nodded slowly. "I've reviewed your data. You're not just brave, you're right. And this isn't going away." The board murmured among themselves. Questions were asked about method, about verification, about student protections. Rayna answered them all. Steady, factual, unshaken. When the hearing ended, she stepped outside into a sea of flashing lights and microphones. But this time she wasn't alone. Behind her stood Mia, Lila, Darian, Zach, and a few others from the original basement meeting. They'd driven down separately. They wanted her to see she wasn't the only voice anymore. One reporter shouted, "Rayna, do you think this hearing will change anything?" She paused. "I think the truth already has." That evening, while Rayna sat at her dining table rewatching the broadcast with her family, her email pinged. She opened it cautiously. It was from a state audit coordinator. Subject: preliminary action notice. Preston High Academic Equity Audit approved. Body: due to your testimony and the supporting evidence presented at today's hearing, Preston High School has been selected for immediate academic tracking and equity audit under the direction of the Virginia Department of Education. All class placements, disciplinary records, counselor recommendations, and award nominations from the past 5 years will be reviewed in full. This process begins next week. Thank you for your courage. Rayna stared at the screen. I think, she whispered, they're finally going to see what we've been living. Her mother reached over and squeezed her hand, but as she leaned back in her chair, her phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Mia. Rayna, you need to see who just posted on Facebook. Rayna clicked the link. It led to a public post, long, emotional, raw, from Mr. Ellison, the English teacher. Her testimony triggered an audit of Preston High's academic tracking system. The morning after the basement meeting, Preston High woke up to a quiet storm brewing behind its polished walls. It began at 7:32 a.m., when the teachers' inboxes pinged in unison. The subject line was stark and impossible to ignore. The truth about Preston High. Read before you celebrate excellence again. Attached were 12 pages of data. Enrollment charts, honors program, rosters, student testimonials, screenshots of emails between teachers and counselors. It was the same evidence Rayna and her group had collected, but stripped of names, watermarked only with a line at the bottom, compiled by concerned students of Preston High. By 7:40, the copy machine in the faculty lounge was running non-stop. Teachers stood in clusters, papers trembling in their hands. Some whispered, others scoffed. The ones who recognized the data looked pale. At 8:05, the principal, Mr. Adler, stormed into the main office, holding a crumpled printout. Who sent this? He demanded. The secretary looked at him nervously. It came from an anonymous student email, untraceable. He slammed the paper down. Anonymous? Then someone's hiding behind lies. But deep down, even he knew this wasn't fabricated. The data was too precise, too organized, too damning. By the time the first bell rang, word had already spread among the students. Hallways buzzed with speculation. Some called it the equity leak. Others joked nervously about who would get cancelled next. Mia found Rayna near her locker, her expression unreadable. You didn't send it, did you? Rayna shook her head. Not me. Then who? Rayna hesitated. Zach, maybe? He had access to the files through the newspaper drive. But we agreed, no leaks yet, Mia said, glancing around. It's too soon. Yeah, Rayna replied quietly. But maybe that's why it happened. By second period, every student in the building had heard. Some applauded the move, calling it brave. Others rolled their eyes, saying it was just another race thing. Teachers avoided eye contact with their black student. Even the janitors moved slower, listening to the tension in the air like static. Then came the intercom crackle. At 10, attention staff and students. Principal Adler's voice boomed, steady but clipped. Due to recent misinformation being circulated electronically, we will be holding an emergency staff meeting after third period. Please refrain from spreading unverified claims. Thank you. Unverified claims. Rayna felt the phrase slice through her chest. During lunch, she sat with her group in the back of the cafeteria. Phones buzzed constantly with screenshots of teacher emails. A few sympathetic students shared the documents on social media. One tweet read, "If you're proud of Preston, read this before you brag about your school's diversity." The post gained traction. Hundreds of shares within an hour. Layla leaned forward, whispering, "It's blowing up, Rayna. This is bigger than we planned." Rayna looked up from her phone. "We didn't plan this at all. Someone moved before we were ready." Darian frowned. "Whoever sent that email just lit the match." Mia glanced around. "Yeah, but matches only burn what's already dry." By the end of the day, Preston High was on the brink of something it had never faced before: public accountability. At 2:09 p.m., every teacher was called to the auditorium for the emergency meeting. Mr. Adler stood at the podium, flanked by the assistant principal and the district's PR coordinator. His face was flushed, his tone defensive. "These documents are misleading," he said firmly. "Yes, there may be discrepancies in our data, but context matters. Numbers alone don't tell the full story." A murmur rippled through the crowd. One teacher, Mr. Ellison from English, raised his hand. "But if the data is accurate, shouldn't we at least discuss why it looks like this?" Adler's jaw tightened. "We are investigating the source, not the content. Whoever did this violated digital policy and compromised confidential school data." Across the room, a younger teacher whispered to a colleague, "He's more worried about who sent it than what it says." By 3:30, the meeting ended with more questions than answers. But the damage was already done. That evening, screenshots from the leaked report appeared on local Facebook groups and parent forums. Some parents demanded an investigation into racism at Preston High. Others called the students troublemakers. Rayna watched it unfold on her phone from the edge of her bed, her hands shaking. Her mother stood in the doorway, eyes tired but knowing. "You had something to do with this, didn't you?" Rayna hesitated. "Not directly." Her mother sighed. "You knew it was coming, though." "Yeah," Rayna whispered. "But not like this, baby," her mother said softly, sitting beside her. "The truth always finds its way out. But the people who tell it, they're the ones who pay first." Rayna leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "I can handle it." "I know you can," her mother said. "I just hope they don't make you pay alone." The next morning, Rayna barely stepped into first period before hearing her name over the intercom. "Rayna Holloway, please report to the principal's office immediately." The entire class turned. The teacher paused mid-lecture. Rayna gathered her bag in silence, ignoring the whispers. In the office, she found Mia, Darian, and Layla already waiting. Zach stood apart from them, his face pale. Principal Adler closed the door behind them. His expression was calm, too calm. "I assume you know why you're here." No one spoke. He continued. "We have evidence that the documents circulated yesterday originated from your group's shared drive. That is a serious violation of school policy." "We didn't send the email," Rayna said evenly. Adler leaned forward. "Someone did. And unless the real culprit steps forward, you'll all be held accountable." The assistant principal slid a printed copy of the email across the desk. "Do you deny that these are your files?" Rayna glanced at the familiar spreadsheets. "The data is ours," she said quietly. "But we didn't leak it." "So you admit to collecting it?" Adler said sharply. "Yes," Rayna replied. "Because no one else would." His expression hardened. "That's not your role, Miss Holloway. Students don't audit the school. They learn. You've crossed a line." Mia spoke up. "We were just trying to show the truth." Adler's tone turned cold. "You don't understand how dangerous misinformation can be. You're damaging this school's reputation." Darian muttered under his breath. "Maybe it deserves to be damaged." Adler slammed a hand on the desk. "Enough. I am giving you one opportunity. One to make this right." He looked straight at Rayna. "You're the leader here. You'll draft an apology, admit that the information was misleading, and delete every copy of these files. Do that, and this ends quietly. Refuse, and you'll face suspension for misconduct and digital policy violation." Rayna stared at him, heart pounding in her ears. Around her, the room felt smaller, airless. Her friends watched, waiting. Adler leaned closer. "This isn't just about you. Think about your future. Colleges, scholarships. Don't throw it all away for a mistake." For a long moment, Rayna said nothing. Her pulse thudded in her throat. Then she looked up, her eyes clear, steady, defiant. "Mistake?" she said quietly. "The only mistake is pretending this isn't real." Adler's smile vanished. Rayna was given an ultimatum: apologize and delete the files, or face suspension. The audit's first phase began quietly, a stack of requests for documents, spreadsheets, internal logs, but within days, the state auditors uncovered a folder the school district did not know was searchable. Archived email logs from the past 7 years, hidden under the label staff correspondence. Old, it contained threads that would undo the polish of Preston High School's public image. Rayna sat at the kitchen table when her mother placed a printed excerpt in front of her. The subject line read, "Recommendation List Final Draft." The text inside, casual references to quota kids, and keeping the elite track clean, followed by laughter emojis, someone's attempt at humor. In another thread, a counselor typed, "Yes, let's keep the board happy, recommendation list done. No minority names this year, just clean academic picks." The tone was breezy, the prejudice chilling. Her breath caught. The words weren't accusations. They were admissions of a system that talked about exclusion, as if it were a joke. Rayna leaned back, tears welling even as her resolve hardened. This was the kind of evidence that could collapse a carefully constructed facade. The auditors didn't release full content publicly. They couldn't, but excerpts leaked anyway, via anonymous parent groups, activist networks, social media. The district had no choice but to respond. A press release that morning read, "Preston County School District takes allegations of misconduct seriously. We are cooperating fully with the Virginia Department of Education and are committed to fairness and transparency." The words hung in the air like an apology without remorse. At school, the effect was immediate. Teachers looked at each other differently. The lounge that once hummed with small talk now carried furtive glances and low mutters. Counselors checked their phones in the corner. One veteran teacher nearly dropped his coffee when a student showed him a screenshot. "That can't be real," he muttered. Another whispered, "It's literally what we've seen for years." In board meetings, parents lined up to speak. They told stories of their children being passed by, of guidance counselors steering them away from STEM, of awards committees that overlooked them year after year. One mother, voice trembling, held up a photo of her son graduated last year, valedictorian candidate, but never nominated for honors. "He told me he gave up," she said, "because he believed they didn't want him to win." The room held its breath. Behind the scenes, the district attempted containment. Emails to staff warned against sharing documents. Counselors were told to direct student inquiries to a new ombuds office. Some administrators scheduled mandatory diversity training sessions after school, with pizza, but the damage was already done. Data once hidden had been exposed. Trust once taken for granted had been erased. Rayna watched from the sidelines. She did not become the center of attention again. This time the spotlight was on the system. Yet she felt the weight of it all, shifting. Parents approached her in the parking lot. Students nodded in the halls. Even teachers she had only known formally offered soft thank yous. She felt a strange mix of vindication and exhaustion. Knowing she was right didn't make the exposure easy. Then came an unexpected twist. An old email thread surfaced where one of the senior administrators had forwarded a teacher's list of recommended honor students to his own daughter. Not once but twice before posting the official list publicly. The administrator's excuse, "family first," that thread became the viral kernel of outrage. Suddenly the conversation shifted from bias to favoritism. It wasn't just about excluding minorities, it was about privileging insiders. The school district's narrative of meritocracy imploded. In the following days, the local newspaper ran feature stories on the audit. One headline read, "When the numbers are right, but the system is wrong." Another quoted a student, "They told me to play it safe, so safe I disappeared." On social media, hashtags from earlier games were still trending. Let Rayna speak, hidden tracking, Preston audit. Parent-teacher groups that once avoided controversy now added equity oversight to their agendas. At a PTA meeting, the superintendent addressed the crowd. He said, "We are committed to learning from this." A mother interrupted, "When do we get to see the report? When do we get to see consequences?" Silence followed. Meanwhile, Rayna prepared for the next step. Every evening she logged into a secure student portal created by the state auditors to submit witness names and allow anonymous testimonies. She read dozens of entries, from students at Preston and other schools, describing what she had seen: corners where black students weren't nominated, mentors who didn't expect them to lead, reminders to hang back when others got spotlighted. The scale was larger than any one school. Her phone beeped with a message from Mia. "Board meeting scheduled for October 12. You're on the agenda." Rayna exhaled slowly. The next moment was approaching. The night before the school board's public hearing, Rayna lay in her bed listening to the quiet of the house, her thoughts loud. She thought of Darian and Layla, of her mother and brother, of the students whom no one had asked to speak. She thought of the emails, the data, the leaked evidence that had set this all in motion. In the dark her phone glowed, with a new notification. "You've been selected as a student advocate for the statewide Committee on Academic Equity." Her heart skipped. The invitation wasn't just to testify, it was to advise. She sat up. The war had shifted arenas. This wasn't just about Preston High anymore. The school board voted to hold a public hearing, and Rayna was asked to testify again. 10 Preston's most divisive school board meeting ever. Word count. The folding chairs in Preston High's gymnasium had never held such tension. Under the glaring overhead lights, the rows filled early, packed tight with students, teachers, parents, and reporters. The front rows were a sea of stern-faced administrators and school board members, each seated behind long white tables stacked with bottled water and paper agendas. Behind them, cameras from 3 different news stations rolled quietly, red lights blinking like steady heartbeat. Outside, the wind shook the trees, and more residents crowded in. Some wearing buttons that read "Support our schools," others holding signs that read, "We stand with Rayna." A student group sat in near unison, each one in a black t-shirt, with the words "Silenced but still here." At 6:02 p.m., board chairwoman Lydia Graves gavelled the meeting to order. Her tone was sharp, trying to project calm over the crackling energy. Tonight's hearing will address concerns raised during the recent state audit. We ask for respect, clarity, and brevity, but respect was already hanging by a thread. The first speaker, a PTA mother, stepped to the mic and accused the board of abandoning teachers in the face of political correctness. She was met with loud applause from one side of the room and audible groans from the other. Next, a former student read from her journal how she was told by her counselor she wasn't a good fit for AP Science, despite scoring highest in her class. The room quieted. Someone clapped slowly. Then a teacher stood up and said, "We did what we thought was best for the school." A voice from the crowd shouted, "Best for who?" Chaos threatened. Security stepped forward, hovering near the stage. Through it all, Rayna waited near the edge of the gym, her speech folded in her hands. Her mother sat beside her, one hand on her knee. "You don't have to convince them all," she whispered. "Just make them hear you." At 7:14, Rayna's name was called. She rose, walked slowly to the podium. The room, once noisy, fell still, eerily so. She adjusted the mic. "My name is Rayna Holloway," she began, voice steady but quiet. "I'm a senior here at Preston High, or at least I was, until I was suspended for exposing a pattern this school has refused to see." A murmur. Flashbulbs clicked. "I didn't come here to argue about data. You've already seen that. I came to talk about what it feels like to be invisible in a school that claims to celebrate success." She looked directly at the board. "For 4 years, I did everything right. I worked twice as hard for half the recognition. I watched my classmates get celebrated while I was passed over again and again. Not because I wasn't smart enough, but because I didn't look like the students they were used to applauding." Someone in the crowd shouted, "Liar." Security moved. Chairwoman Graves banged her gavel. "Order." Rayna didn't flinch. "They say it's not about race," she continued. "But when black students make up nearly 20% of the school and 0% of your leadership programs, something is about race. When our names never appear on honor rolls, on student council ballots, on nomination lists, that's not coincidence, that's design." Her voice sharpened. "And when we finally speak, you call us divisive. You tell us we're ruining your image. But the truth doesn't ruin reputations, it reveals them." Silence. Tears welled in the eyes of a few parents. Others folded their arms tighter. Rayna's next words came slowly. "This isn't about revenge, it's about recognition, about how it feels to be erased over and over, until you start to believe you don't belong." She took a breath. "I'm not angry. I'm exhausted. But I'll keep speaking, because I know now being silent won't save us." When she stepped back from the mic, the room stayed quiet. Then, from the far side, applause began. Light at first, then louder, and louder still. Soon half the gym was on its feet. The other half remained seated, arms crossed, faces tight with discomfort. Chairwoman Graves looked flustered. "Thank you, Miss Holloway. That concludes." But a hand raised on the board. It belonged to Malcolm Trent, the newest member, formerly a local educator, now an advocate for educational reform. His suit was modest, his voice anything but. "I have a motion," he said firmly. Graves blinked. "This isn't the time for new business." Trent ignored her. "I move that this board call for the immediate resignation of Principal Charles Adler, based on the findings of the audit, the public erosion of trust, and the failure to protect equity within Preston High." The room exploded. Gasps. Applause. Outrage. Rayna's eyes widened. Her mother covered her mouth. Graves banged the gavel. "Mr. Trent, that's completely out of procedure." Trent stood. "You want procedure?" A student was suspended for telling the truth. Teachers joked about quotas. Counselors made backroom lists. And this principal oversaw all of it. He pointed at the cameras. "If we don't act now, we're telling every student of color in this town that their excellence is negotiable." Rayna froze. It wasn't just a board meeting anymore. It was live, public, historic. One reporter whispered into their mic, "This could change everything." Chairwoman Graves, red-faced, glanced nervously at her colleagues. "We'll call a vote to consider a motion of no confidence at a later meeting." Trent sat down, but not before adding, "Make it soon, or we'll call it for you." Rayna stepped off the stage. The moment had passed, but its impact rippled across the room. Some clapped, some scowled, but no one could say they hadn't heard her. She walked back to her seat, shaken but proud. Mia met her halfway, whispering, "You just shook the system. Rayna nodded, but before she could respond, a hand tapped her shoulder. A reporter. You need to see this, the woman said, handing over a phone. Check who just issued a statement. Rayna took the phone. Her eyes scanned the screen, then widened. The Department of Justice had just launched an inquiry into Preston High. One board member called for the principal's resignation on live television. The morning after the school board meeting felt surreal. The usual rhythm of Preston High was replaced by hushed tones and darting glances. No announcements played over the intercom. No teachers gathered at the front office for morning coffee. The parking lot was half empty, and students entered the building with uncertainty written across their faces. By 9:12 a.m., an email had been sent to every student, staff member and parent in the district. Effective immediately, Principal Charles Adler has resigned from his position at Preston High. An interim principal will be announced shortly. Further administrative actions are pending. The words were sterile, void of emotion, but their impact echoed through the school like a bomb blast. Rayna read it twice before whispering, "He actually did it." In room 208, Mr. Ellison sat at his desk with the lights off, reading the same email on his laptop. He closed it slowly and stared out the window. "We thought we were doing our jobs," he muttered, "but the truth is, some of us were just playing along." Down the hallway, the counselor's office sat empty. Two of the staff were placed on administrative leave that morning, pending investigation for their roles in the unofficial recommendation system, exposed by the audit. Their names weren't listed, but everyone knew who they were. Their doors were locked, their nameplates removed. By lunchtime, a crowd had gathered at the front of the school, not in protest but in something more complicated: disbelief. Students who once dismissed Rayna's warnings were now re-evaluating every guidance session, every class assignment, every college suggestion they'd ever been given. The illusion had shattered, and in its place stood a new kind of awareness. Rayna didn't gloat. She couldn't. Because for all the noise, she knew real change wasn't just about who left. It was about what came next. That afternoon she met with Mia, Darian, Layla, and 3 other students in the library basement, the place where this all began. The table was covered in notes, laptops and a hastily drawn flowchart on a whiteboard. "We can't just watch them clean house and call it reform," Rayna said. "We need something permanent. Something student-led." Darian leaned in. "You mean like a watchdog group?" "More than that," Mia said. "An oversight committee, with access to class placement data, award nominations, club leadership decisions, so we can monitor who's being included and who's being erased." Layla added, "Not just to catch racism, but to prevent it." Rayna nodded. "We need a seat at the table, not just a microphone at the podium." They drafted the proposal that night. A student-led equity oversight committee, with real authority, to review academic placement trends, nominations, and disciplinary records, backed by student testimonies and annual reports submitted to the board. The next week, they presented it to the interim superintendent and the school board during a special session. As Rayna stood at the podium once again, she handed each board member a printed copy of the plan. "This isn't about punishment," she said calmly. "It's about accountability. You've seen what happens when students are left out of the conversation. This is how you fix it, with us, not after us." She pointed to a section labeled Transparency and Prevention Protocols. "It's not just about who gets into AP classes or wins awards. It's about who's allowed to imagine themselves succeeding." The room was quiet. Board members flipped through the proposal, murmuring to each other. Chairwoman Graves looked skeptical. "This kind of oversight is ambitious," she said, "and difficult to implement without compromising academic autonomy." Rayna didn't flinch. "What compromises more autonomy than erasing students from the system?" Another board member leaned forward. "This could open the door to legal complications, privacy issues, staffing concerns." Darian stood. "The real issue is, for years no one thought twice about Black students being left out. That wasn't complicated for you. That was convenient." The board shifted uncomfortably. Mia added, "You want a way to rebuild trust? Give us the tools to see what's been hidden." The debate stretched on. Words like feasibility and structure floated through the air like anchors. Every minute that passed felt like a slow retreat from the urgency that brought them there. Then unexpectedly a voice rang out from the back of the room. "I support it." Heads turned. Mr. Ellison stepped into the aisle, his tie loose, papers in his hand. "I've taught here for 15 years, he said. "And I've seen the patterns. I ignored them. I called them coincidence. But they weren't. He walked to the front. I didn't want to admit I was part of the problem. But when Rayna spoke, I realized I had been silent for too long. He turned to the board. This oversight committee. It's not a threat. It's a chance. A chance for us to finally do what we say we're doing. Educating fairly. Honest. Rayna's eyes burned. Not with pain, but with gratitude. One board member whispered something to another. Chairwoman Graves pursed her lips, then nodded once. We'll vote on the proposal next week, she said. And Mr. Ellison, thank you for your honesty. After the meeting, as people filtered out, Mr. Ellison approached Rayna. I should have listened sooner, he said softly. You're listening now, Rayna replied. As the crowd dispersed, Mia turned to Rayna. That was big, Rayna nodded slowly. Yeah. But they haven't voted yet. No, Mia said. But now they have to look us in the eye when they do. Back in the hallway, the posters for the spring talent show were being stapled to the bulletin boards. Life was trying to go on, but the undercurrent had changed. In the shadows of collapse, something new was rising. And then, just before Rayna exited the school that evening, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Ms. Holloway, we've reviewed your proposal with interest. I'm a state education reform strategist currently reviewing case models for youth-led equity councils. Would you be available for a consultation call this week? Her hands trembled slightly. She wasn't just building change at Preston High anymore. She was building a blueprint. The board hesitated, until a powerful voice stood up in their defense. 12. A teacher's confession that changed everything. Word count. For years Mr. Ellison had walked the halls of Preston High as a fixture, respected, reliable, uncontroversial. He was known for his tidy lesson plans, his literary puns, and his belief that character shows in commas. But in the weeks following Principal Adler's resignation, something in him shifted. The careful neutrality he had practiced for so long began to feel like guilt, dressed in professionalism. He'd watched Rayna Holloway rise, not just as a student, but as a truth-teller, and he'd watched himself shrink in those moments, saying little, staying safe. That silence had become unbearable. The morning of the final school board vote, on the oversight committee, Mr. Ellison stood alone in the faculty lounge, sipping lukewarm coffee and staring at a faded staff photo from 10 years ago. Nearly every face was white. He hadn't noticed it back then. Now he couldn't unsee it. By the time evening fell, the gymnasium was full again. Rayna and her team sat in the front row, their proposal revised, refined and ready. The board sat behind their long table, papers stacked, tension thick. Chairwoman Graves called the meeting to order and motioned for public comment before the vote. Then Mr. Ellison stood. He wasn't on the speaker list. He hadn't prepared a statement. But his steps were deliberate as he walked to the mic. I wasn't going to speak tonight, he began, voice trembling. But I've spent the last few weeks asking myself why I didn't see what was happening. Why I let it happen. He looked toward Rayna. I've been teaching here for 15 years, and in that time, I've taught dozens of brilliant black students, thoughtful, talented, driven. But I never nominated them for awards. I never pushed them toward AP courses. And I told myself it was because they didn't ask. A hush swept the room. I see now. They didn't ask because they knew the answer. And I gave them the answer anyway, with silence. He pulled a folded sheet from his pocket. His hands shook as he opened it. This is a list of students I could have nominated. I remember every one of them. I didn't forget. I just didn't fight for them. And I want to say their names now. Not because I can change what happened, but because they deserve to be named. He read 5 names, each followed by the year they graduated, the GPA they carried, the opportunities they were never given. By the 4th name, Rayna's throat tightened. By the 5th, her mother was quietly crying in the row behind her. I failed them, Mr. Ellison said, and I failed Rayna too. She showed us the truth, and I didn't stand with her. Not when it counted. He paused, voice cracking. But I am standing with her now. I support the oversight committee. I support students being part of the system that judges them. And if this makes me unpopular, so be it. He stepped back from the mic, his shoulders heavier, but his face clear for the first time in weeks. A long silence followed. Then, slowly, another teacher stood. Miss Leary from science. I discouraged Javon Foster from applying to the state engineering camp because I assumed his family couldn't afford it, she said. I never asked. I just assumed. Another voice. I used to recommend less stressful electives to black students who showed signs of stress. But I pushed white students harder. I called it compassion. It was bias. Another, I never realized how often I used the word surprised when grading strong papers from black students. The confessions rolled in, not defensive, not performative, raw, embarrassing, necessary. Each one cracked the dam, and the crowd changed. Some parents looked down, uncomfortable. Others nodded, eyes wide with the kind of clarity that comes only after denial breaks. Chairwoman Graves tapped her gavel once. "Thank you for your honesty. We will now move to the motion on the Student Oversight Committee." Rayna straightened in her seat. Graves continued. "The board acknowledges the strength and sincerity of the proposal. However, after legal consultation and district review, the committee will be approved with one condition." Rayna frowned. Graves read from the paper in front of her. "The Student-Led Oversight Committee will be granted review authority over academic tracking and nominations. However, all public reports must first pass review by a district-appointed advisory panel, including at least 2 board members and 1 external consultant." Rayna's heart sank. It was a compromise, a gatekeeping clause. They were giving them power, but tying it to oversight that could filter or block what they found. Mia leaned in. "They're trying to hold the leash." Rayna nodded slowly. "But they've already opened the door." Graves called for a vote. 7 members raised their hands in favor. 1 abstained. "The motion passes," she declared. "Effective next semester, the Preston Student Oversight Committee will be established under the terms discussed." A mix of cheers and tense murmurs rippled through the room. Rayna stood as others clapped. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Later outside the gym, she stood with her team under the soft glow of the streetlights. "We did it," Layla said, half smiling. "Almost," Rayna replied. "They're going to try to manage us," Mia said. "Shape the narrative." Rayna looked up at the sky, her breath forming clouds in the cold. "Then we'll just have to speak louder." Just then her phone buzzed. A message from a name she didn't recognize. From Emma Ellison. "Oh, subject. If you're going to build this committee, I want in." Rayna smiled, genuinely this time. But as she pocketed her phone, another message buzzed through. This one was from an anonymous number. "You think this is over? We're just getting started. You've made enemies you can't see yet." Rayna's face went still. The applause, the approval, the progress. It was real, but so was the resistance. Rayna's committee was approved, but under one risky condition. From the outside, it looked like Preston High had returned to normal. The bells still rang on time. Seniors still crammed for AP exams. The cafeteria still served its infamous soggy pizza. But inside the fabric of the school, something had shifted. Quietly, persistently. The Student Equity Oversight Committee, once seen as an overreach, was now embedded in the rhythm of campus life. Rayna, now officially chair of the committee, carried a slim black folder everywhere she went. Inside it were spreadsheets, nomination forms, anonymized reports, and a calendar of meetings. Every week, she and her team sat down with department heads, counselors, and club sponsors, not as adversaries, but as partners with questions they refused to stop asking. "Can you walk us through the criteria for these placements again? Has this student been nominated before? If not, why? How do you ensure your recommendations aren't shaped by unconscious bias?" Some meetings were smooth. Others were anything but. One Monday afternoon, in a session with the math department, a veteran teacher raised an eyebrow. "So you're saying we've been racist with our AP placements?" Rayna stayed calm. "I'm saying the numbers show a pattern. We're here to understand why." Another teacher scoffed. "We're teachers, not sociologists." Darian, now head of the data review subcommittee, leaned forward. "That's why we're here to help you see the patterns you've been too close to notice." Over time, the resistance softened. Some of it, at least. By week 4, the committee had identified 7 students, Black and Latino, who met the GPA and teacher evaluation benchmarks for advanced classes, but had never been recommended. All 7 were moved into accelerated tracks. By week 6, Mia's subcommittee had rewritten the nomination form for student council elections. The old form asked sponsors to rate leadership polish. The new version focused on impact, initiative, and peer respect. By week 8, Rayna noticed something that stopped her cold. A white sophomore, one of the first critics of her testimony, was now mentoring a black freshman for the school's speech and debate club. Voluntarily, quietly. She didn't point it out. She just noted it. Change didn't always come with applause. But the committee's work wasn't without friction. In the counselor's office, a new administrator assigned to liaise with the committee insisted on approving every report before it went public. He framed it as maintaining district alignment. Rayna called it what it was: bureaucratic buffering. One afternoon, when a report highlighting gender and racial disparities in science nominations was held up for 2 weeks, she confronted him directly. "We were told this committee was about transparency," she said. "Are you helping us reveal the truth, or helping them edit it?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "This is bigger than one school now, Rayna. People are watching. We just want to be careful." "Truth doesn't need caution," she said. "It needs consistency." He didn't respond, but the report was published the next day. Despite setbacks, momentum built. More students volunteered to join. Teachers started asking for committee input on new projects. The chess club, which had never had a black member in 10 years, recruited 3 students from Rayna's mentor group. Still, not everyone approved. A group of parents formed an anonymous coalition online, claiming the committee created reverse discrimination. They circulated emails warning that merit was under attack. Rayna received a second anonymous threat in her locker. This one folded into a fake flyer for an honors program. Inside it read, "This isn't your school, no matter how many meetings you attend." She reported it. Nothing came of it. But she didn't stop. By the end of the semester, the first full committee report was ready. It was 40 pages long, cleanly formatted, with side-by-side charts comparing nomination data before and after the committee was formed. It didn't accuse. It revealed. Every page said the same thing. Progress was possible, but only when monitored. Rayna stood before the school board once more, holding the final report like a second heartbeat. "Was it perfect?" she asked the board. "No. But we proved that change isn't theoretical. It's trackable. It's visible. And it's overdue." The board, which had once hesitated to approve the committee, now nodded in collective respect. Chairwoman Graves even smiled. "It appears," she said, "that this was not a fluke." Later that night, Rayna sat in the library, with Mia and Lila, watching the sun dip below the school's facade. "We made it through the semester," Lila whispered. "Can you believe it?" Rayna leaned back in her chair, exhausted but awake. "We didn't make it," she said. "We built it." Her phone buzzed. A new email. Subject: invitation to collaborate. National Equity Lab. Rayna blinked. She opened it slowly. "Dear Ms. Holloway, your work with the Student Oversight Committee at Preston High has reached our attention. The National Equity Lab is currently piloting student-led equity initiatives across the country. We'd like to invite you to a roundtable summit next month in DC to share your model and explore expansion opportunities. Please let us know if you're available to speak." Rayna's mouth opened slightly. She handed the phone to Mia. Mia's eyes widened. "Rayna, this is national." Layla looked over. "They want to take your model to other schools." Rayna shook her head. "Not mine. Ours." She looked at the ceiling, as if seeing something bigger now. Something beyond the gym, the hallways, the board meetings. "We have a blueprint now," she whispered, "and people are listening." But as she packed her things to leave, her phone buzzed again. This time, the message wasn't from an ally. It was from someone in the district office, an internal email accidentally forwarded to her account. She clicked it open. The subject line, "What do we do about Rayna next year?" And the line that followed sent a chill through her chest. "We can't let her keep shaping policy unchecked. She's too visible now to confront directly. But there are other ways to handle it." Quiet. Rayna stared at the screen, her breath caught. The world was watching. But so were those who still wanted the silence back. A National Education Foundation requested a meeting with Rayna about expanding the model. Rayna didn't notice the shift at first. It was gradual, like a sunrise you only realize happened once you feel the warmth on your skin. The first national article about her appeared quietly in a Sunday feature, titled "The Girl Who Challenged the System." Then came an op-ed in a leading education journal, followed by an unexpected phone call from a professor at Howard University. He had read her oversight committee report and wanted her to speak to a group of graduate students studying education policy. "You're not just a student anymore, Rayna," he said during their first Zoom call. "You're an architect." Word spread. What began in a basement beneath Preston High was now being discussed in conference rooms, policy panels, and state superintendent roundtables. Rayna's inbox flooded. Messages from students in Mississippi, administrators in Oregon, parents in New Jersey. They all wanted to know how she did it. Not just how she stood up, but how she kept standing after the wave crashed. Rayna had always imagined going to college quietly, maybe majoring in biology or English, staying in the background. Now she was being asked to give keynote speeches at education equity conferences, to co-author white papers, to sit on advisory calls with nonprofit leaders decades older than her. At a conference in Atlanta, she stood in a room of national education reformers and spoke about the difference between data and dignity. The room fell silent when she said, "We don't need more reports, we need courage." After her speech, the superintendent approached her with tears in her eyes. "My district's been watching you," she said, "and we're finally ready to admit we've been part of the problem." Yet through all the headlines, invitations, and flashing lights, Rayna kept returning to one goal: ensuring no student ever had to feel as invisible as she once did. Back in Preston, the Student Oversight Committee had grown into a well-oiled machine. There were now 15 active members, weekly public reports, and an annual student voice forum attended by over 200 participants. The honors program that once excluded so many now reflected the school's true demographics. For the first time in years, Black students were winning awards, running clubs, and leading projects without having to beg for inclusion. Still, the email she'd received weeks ago from the district office lingered in her mind. She's too visible now to confront directly, but there are other ways to handle it. Quietly. She had never found out who sent it. Rayna shared it with Mia and Darian. They advised her to go public, but Rayna held back. She knew what it would look like: paranoia, deflection. So she saved the email, forwarded it to her personal inbox, and waited. Then came the call from the National Equity Lab. They wanted to fund the expansion of the Preston model into 5 more schools. Not next year now, but there was a condition. Rayna would have to serve as a formal student consultant, travel, sign off on documents, be the face of it. It was everything she had fought for, and everything the district feared. "They'll try to spin it," Mia warned. "That you're distracted, not focused on school, that you're politicizing education." "I'm not politicizing anything," Rayna replied. "I'm proof of what they tried to hide." Her mother supported the decision, though cautiously. "Just promise me one thing," she said over dinner. "Don't let the spotlight blind you to where you came from." Rayna promised, and meant it. 2 weeks before graduation, Rayna was interviewed live on a national morning show. The host called her a rising voice in the fight for educational justice. As the camera cut to her face, Rayna said only, "I didn't start out trying to be heard. I just wanted to be seen." The clip went viral. By the time graduation week arrived, Rayna was more than a local name. She was a symbol. At the ceremony, folding chairs filled the football field. Teachers wore ribbons with "We Heard You" printed across them. Students in cap and gown smiled wide, not just for finishing school, but for surviving it. Rayna sat in the front row, valedictorian sash draped across her shoulders. It wasn't given as a favor. It had been earned, and this time not denied. Principal Adler had been replaced by a young Black woman named Dr. Lane, who began her tenure with a speech about truth, accountability, and making room for the voices that used to be left out. The energy was different now. Charged, honest, hopeful. As Rayna stepped up to the podium to deliver her speech, she looked out at her peers. She didn't talk about what had happened to her. She talked about what they had all done together. How the silence broke. How the pages turned. How the system once so rigid had bent just enough for something new to begin growing. And then, just as she finished her final line, "We built something they said couldn't exist. Let them hear us now." The superintendent stepped forward with an unexpected announcement. "Before we conclude this ceremony," he said, "we have one more recognition to present." Rayna blinked. "This year," he continued, "a new statewide award has been created in honor of student leadership and systemic change. It is called the Holloway Honor." The crowd gasped. The superintendent looked directly at Rayna. "It will be awarded each year to a student who refuses to accept silence, who turns data into dialogue, and who fights not for credit but for justice." He stepped back. "And the inaugural recipient is Rayna Holloway." The auditorium erupted. Rayna stood frozen, the medal placed around her neck as cameras flashed, and the sound of a standing ovation rose like a wave she could no longer hold back. But just as she returned to her seat, heart pounding, a familiar figure approached from the side of the stage. A woman in a gray suit. She whispered something to the superintendent, handed him an envelope, and nodded once before leaving, as quickly as she arrived. The superintendent opened the envelope and his expression changed. He walked back to the mic, slightly stunned. "There's one more thing." He held up the letter. We've just received confirmation from the U.S. Department of Education. Rayna Holloway has been selected to join the National Student Advisory Council on Equity and Access. She will be advising the Secretary of Education next semester on a pilot program inspired by her work here at Preston. The field fell completely silent. Even the wind paused. Rayna's hands shook. Mia clutched her shoulder. "You're not just a voice now," she whispered. "You're a blueprint." Rayna stared out at the horizon. The crowd, the future unfolding faster than she'd ever expected. But then, beneath all the applause and celebration, her phone buzzed again. A private message. No name, no number, just one sentence. "Enjoy the spotlight, Rayna. But remember, they always find ways to dim it." On graduation day, a surprise announcement shook the entire auditorium. The air was thick with June warmth, the sun resting heavy over the football field, where rows of white folding chairs faced a stage, draped in navy and gold. Preston High's class of seniors sat shoulder to shoulder in caps and gowns, fanning themselves, exchanging glances, waiting for the moment that was supposed to belong to them all, but somehow undeniably, now revolved around one, Rayna Holloway. Her name had become more than just a student ID or a name roll call. It had become a symbol, a question, a reckoning. And now finally, it was etched into the valedictorian plaque, engraved beneath the school's banner for all to see. A title they once denied her, one she now held without apology. "Is this really happening?" Mia whispered beside her, as the principal, Dr. Lane, approached the podium with a wide smile. Rayna gave a soft nod, barely able to breathe. Her name was about to be called. Not as a protester, not as a problem, but as Preston High's top student. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Lane began, "today we honor a student who did not just rise to meet the standard, but challenged the very system that defines it." Rayna blinked, tears pressing against the backs of her eyes. A student who reminded us that justice isn't always loud, but it is always necessary. Our 2025 valedictorian, Rayna Holloway. The applause was instant and thunderous. Students rose. Parents cheered. A few staff members wept quietly. Rayna stood slowly, her legs stiff, heart thudding so loud she could barely hear the crowd. The walk to the podium felt endless. Every step carried the weight of every fight, every denial, every night she doubted herself but refused to back down. And then she was there, behind the mic, facing the crowd, the cameras and the country watching live. She took a long breath. "I want to start by saying something simple," she began. "Thank you." The crowd hushed instantly, not just for this moment, but for the ones that came before it. The ones no one clapped for. The ones where I stood alone. She paused, grounding herself. "There was a time not long ago when I didn't believe this day would come, not because I didn't work for it, but because the road to it wasn't built for someone like me." Her voice, soft but unwavering, cut through the speakers. "I've been called a disruptor, a problem, a threat. But the truth is, I was just tired of being quiet." People leaned forward in their seats. The noise disappeared. For too long, success in schools like ours has depended on silence, on students of color knowing their place, on teachers not asking questions, on systems protecting comfort over fairness. I didn't come here to punish anyone. I came here to say our voices matter. Rayna's eyes scanned the crowd. She saw her mother, hand over her mouth, Malik clapping furiously beside her. She saw Mr. Ellison, standing still, head bowed in humble reflection. I was suspended for telling the truth, and I was told that truth would cost me everything. But here I am. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I'm not standing here because I was perfect. I'm standing here because I was honest, because I refused to accept invisibility as normal, because I believed that one voice backed by truth could be enough to shake a room built to ignore it. She looked directly into the nearest camera lens, speaking now to more than just Preston. Wherever you are, whoever you are, if you've ever been silenced, erased, overlooked, I want you to know, you don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to be chosen to matter. And you don't need permission to speak truth to power. The wind shifted slightly, fluttering the edges of her speech papers. But she didn't need to read anymore. Today I graduate not just from a school, but from a silence I didn't choose. And I leave behind a system a little louder, a little braver, and a lot more honest. A single tear slipped down her cheek. We can't fix everything at once, but we can choose to stop pretending it isn't broken. She stepped back, The crowd rose before she even reached the last word. The applause was no longer polite. It was thunderous, aching, necessary. Even the critics clapped. Even the ones who once signed anonymous notes. Even the ones who hadn't believed until now. As Rayna walked off the stage, heart pounding, she felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. Not as a burden, but as a gift. She reached the end of the ramp, trying to steady herself. That's when she saw it. A man in a gray suit approached her with a quiet nod. He handed her a slim white envelope and disappeared back into the crowd. The front of it bore the seal of the National Civil Rights Education Alliance. Rayna opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter, printed on heavy parchment, with 3 simple paragraphs. Dear Ms. Holloway, your work in transforming Preston High has reached national attention. Your courage has not only inspired students, but has reshaped policy discussions in classrooms across the country. We would like to formally invite you to join our Youth Justice Fellowship in Washington, D.C. This program is awarded to 1 student per year, an advocate who embodies the future of civil rights in education. We believe that student is you. At the bottom was a handwritten note. Your voice changed a school. We believe it can change the nation. Rayna's eyes welled again, not from shock, but from recognition, from being seen. She held the letter to her chest as the crowd swarmed her. Teachers' friends, students from lower grades all chanting her name. But in her mind, one voice whispered louder than the rest. The voice of the girl who once sat silently in the front row, straight-A student, always overlooked. You did it. But the journey wasn't ending here. Because even as the cheers echoed through the field, Rayna glanced down at her phone one last time. Another message had just come in. From the Department of Education. Subject: Advisory Seat Nomination. Federal Civil Rights Review Panel. Rayna's hands trembled. One voice had sparked a classroom. That classroom had sparked a movement. And now, the nation was listening. But as she walked off stage, a letter from a national civil rights organization was waiting in her locker, with a life-changing invitation inside. If you've ever felt overlooked, unheard, or erased, this story was for you. Because silence isn't neutral, and justice doesn't come by waiting. It comes when someone dares to speak, even when their voice shakes. Type yes if you believe one voice can change everything. Subscribe if Rayna's fight broke your heart, but gave you hope. The air was thick with June warmth, the sun resting heavy over the football field, where rows of white folding chairs faced a stage draped in navy and gold. Preston High's class of seniors sat shoulder to shoulder in caps and gowns, fanning themselves, exchanging glances, waiting for the moment that was supposed to belong to them all. But somehow undeniably now revolved around one. Rayna Holloway. Her name had become more than just a student ID, or a name roll call. It had become a symbol, a question, a reckoning. And now finally, it was etched into the valedictorian plaque, engraved beneath the school's banner for all to see. A title they once denied her, one she now held without apology. Is this really happening? Mia whispered beside her as the principal, Dr. Lane, approached the podium with a wide smile. Rayna gave a soft nod, barely able to breathe. Her name was about to be called, not as a protester, not as a problem, but as Preston High's top student. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Lane began. Today we honor a student who did not just rise to meet the standard, but challenged the very system that defines it. Rayna blinked, tears pressing against the backs of her eyes. A student who reminded us that justice isn't always loud, but it is always necessary. Our 2025 valedictorian, Rayna Holloway. The applause was instant and thunderous. Students rose, parents cheered. A few staff members wept quietly. Rayna stood slowly, her legs stiff, heart thudding so loud she could barely hear the crowd. The walk to the podium felt endless. Every step carried the weight of every fight, every denial, every night she doubted herself, but refused to back down. And then she was there, behind the mic, facing the crowd, the cameras, and the country watching live. She took a long breath. I want to start by saying something simple. She began. Thank you. The crowd hushed instantly. Not just for this moment, but for the ones that came before it. The ones no one clapped for. The ones where I stood alone. She paused, grounding herself. There was a time not long ago when I didn't believe this day would come. Not because I didn't work for it, but because the road to it wasn't built for someone like me. Her voice, soft but unwavering, cut through the speakers. I've been called a disruptor, a problem, a threat. But the truth is, I was just tired of being quiet. People leaned forward in their seats. The noise disappeared. For too long, success in schools like ours has depended on silence. On students of color knowing their place. On teachers not asking questions. On systems protecting comfort over fairness. I didn't come here to punish anyone. I came here to say, our voices matter. Rayna's eyes scanned the crowd. She saw her mother, hand over her mouth, Malik clapping furiously beside her. She saw Mr. Ellison, standing still, head bowed in humble reflection. I was suspended for telling the truth, and I was told that truth would cost me everything. But here I am. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I'm not standing here because I was perfect. I'm standing here because I was honest. Because I refused to accept invisibility as normal. Because I believed that one voice backed by truth could be enough to shake a room built to ignore it. She looked directly into the nearest camera lens, speaking now to more than just Preston. Wherever you are, whoever you are, if you've ever been silenced, erased, overlooked, I want you to know, you don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to be chosen to matter. And you don't need permission to speak truth to power. The wind shifted slightly, fluttering the edges of her speech papers. But she didn't need to read anymore. Today I graduate not just from a school, but from a silence I didn't choose. And I leave behind a system a little louder, a little braver, and a lot more honest. A single tear slipped down her cheek. We can't fix everything at once, but we can choose to stop pretending it isn't broken. She stepped back. The crowd rose before she even reached the last word. The applause was no longer polite. It was thunderous, aching, necessary. Even the critics clapped, even the ones who once signed anonymous notes, even the ones who hadn't believed until now. As Rayna walked off the stage, heart pounding, she felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders, not as a burden but as a gift. She reached the end of the ramp, trying to steady herself. That's when she saw it. A man in a gray suit approached her with a quiet nod. He handed her a slim white envelope and disappeared back into the crowd. The front of it bore the seal of the National Civil Rights Education Alliance. Rayna opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter, printed on heavy parchment, with 3 simple paragraphs. Dear Ms. Holloway, your work in transforming Preston High has reached national attention. Your courage has not only inspired students but has reshaped policy discussions in classrooms across the country. We would like to formally invite you to join our Youth Justice Fellowship in Washington, D.C. This program is awarded to 1 student per year, an advocate who embodies the future of civil rights in education. We believe that student is you. The air was thick with June warmth, the sun resting heavy over the football field where rows of white folding chairs faced a stage draped in navy and gold. Preston High's class of seniors sat shoulder to shoulder in caps and gowns, fanning themselves, exchanging glances, waiting for the moment that was supposed to belong to them all, but somehow undeniably, now revolved around one. Rayna Holloway. Her name had become more than just a student ID, or a name roll call. It had become a symbol, a question, a reckoning. And now finally, it was etched into the valedictorian plaque, engraved beneath the school's banner for all to see. A title they once denied her, one she now held without apology. Is this really happening? Mia whispered beside her as the principal, Dr. Lane, approached the podium with a wide smile. Rayna gave a soft nod, barely able to breathe. Her name was about to be called, not as a protester, not as a problem, but as Preston High's top student. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Lane began. Today we honor a student who did not just rise to meet the standard, but challenged the very system that defines it. Rayna blinked, tears pressing against the backs of her eyes. A student who reminded us that justice isn't always loud, but it is always necessary. Our 2025 valedictorian, Rayna Holloway. The applause was instant and thunderous. Students rose, parents cheered. A few staff members wept quietly. Rayna stood slowly, her legs stiff, heart thudding so loud she could barely hear the crowd. The walk to the podium felt endless. Every step carried the weight of every fight, every denial, every night she doubted herself but refused to back down. And then she was there, behind the mic, facing the crowd, the cameras, and the country watching live. She took a long breath. I want to start by saying something simple, she began. Thank you. The crowd hushed instantly, not just for this moment, but for the ones that came before it. The ones no one clapped for. The ones where I stood alone. She paused, grounding herself. There was a time not long ago when I didn't believe this day would come. Not because I didn't work for it, but because the road to it wasn't built for someone like me. Her voice, soft but unwavering, cut through the speakers. I've been called a disruptor, a problem, a threat. But the truth is, I was just tired of being quiet. People leaned forward in their seats. The noise disappeared. For too long, success in schools like ours has depended on silence, on students of color knowing their place, on teachers not asking questions, on systems protecting comfort over fairness. I didn't come here to punish anyone. I came here to say our voices matter. Rayna's eyes scanned the crowd. She saw her mother, hand over her mouth, Malik clapping furiously beside her. She saw Mr. Ellison, standing still, head bowed in humble reflection. I was suspended for telling the truth, and I was told that truth would cost me everything. But here I am. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I'm not standing here because I was perfect. I'm standing here because I was honest, because I refused to accept invisibility as normal, because I believed that one voice, backed by truth, could be enough to shake a room built to ignore it. She looked directly into the nearest camera lens, speaking now to more than just Preston. Wherever you are, whoever you are, if you've ever been silenced, erased, overlooked, I want you to know, you don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to be chosen to matter. And you don't need permission to speak truth to power. The wind shifted slightly, fluttering the edges of her speech papers. But she didn't need to read anymore. Today I graduate not just from a school, but from a silence I didn't choose. And I leave behind a system a little louder, a little braver, and a lot more honest. A single tear slipped down her cheek. We can't fix everything at once, but we can choose to stop pretending it isn't broken. She stepped back. The crowd rose before she even reached the last word. The applause was no longer polite. It was thunderous, aching, necessary. Even the critics clapped. Even the ones who once signed anonymous notes. Even the ones who hadn't believed. Until now. As Rayna walked off the stage, heart pounding, she felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders, not as a burden but as a gift. She reached the end of the ramp, trying to steady herself. That's when she saw it. A man in a gray suit approached her with a quiet nod. He handed her a slim white envelope and disappeared back into the crowd. The front of it bore the seal of the National Civil Rights Education Alliance. Rayna opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter, printed on heavy parchment, with 3 simple paragraphs. Dear Miss Holloway, your work in transforming Preston High has reached national attention. Your courage has not only inspired students, but has reshaped policy discussions in classrooms across the country. We would like to formally invite you to join our Youth Justice Fellowship in Washington, D.C. This program is awarded to 1 student per year, an advocate who embodies the future of civil rights in education. We believe that student is you. At the bottom was a handwritten note. Your voice changed a school. We believe it can change the nation. Rayna's eyes welled again. Not from shock but from recognition, from being seen. She held the letter to her chest as the crowd swarmed her, teachers, friends, students from lower grades, all chanting her name. But in her mind, one voice whispered louder than the rest. The voice of the girl who once sat silently in the front row. Straight A student, always overlooked. You did it. But the journey wasn't ending here. Because even as the cheers echoed through the field, Rayna glanced down at her phone one last time. Another message had just come in, from the Department of Education. Subject, Advisory Seat Nomination, Federal Civil Rights Review Panel. Rayna's hands trembled. One voice had sparked a classroom. That classroom had sparked a movement. And now the nation was listening. But as she walked off stage, a letter from a national civil rights organization was waiting in her locker, with a life-changing invitation inside. If you've ever felt overlooked, unheard, or erased, this story was for you. Because silence isn't neutral, and justice doesn't come by waiting. It comes when someone dares to speak, even when their voice shakes. Type yes if you believe one voice can change everything. Subscribe if Rayna's fight broke your heart, but gave you hope. If you've ever felt overlooked, unheard, or erased, this story was for you. Because silence isn't neutral, and justice doesn't come by waiting. It comes when someone dares to speak, even when their voice shakes. Type yes if you believe one voice can change everything. Subscribe if Rayna's fight broke your heart, but gave you hope. The air was thick with June warmth, the sun resting heavy over the football field, where rows of white folding chairs faced a stage, draped in navy and gold. Preston High's class of seniors sat shoulder to shoulder in caps and gowns, fanning themselves, exchanging glances, waiting for the moment that was supposed to belong to them all, but somehow undeniably, now revolved around one, Rayna Holloway. Her name had become more than just a student ID, or a name roll call. It had become a symbol, a question, a reckoning. And now, finally, it was etched into the valedictorian plaque, engraved beneath the school's banner for all to see. A title they once denied her, one she now held without apology. "Is this really happening?" Mia whispered beside her, as the principal, Dr. Lane, approached the podium with a wide smile. Rayna gave a soft nod, barely able to breathe. Her name was about to be called. Not as a protester, not as a problem, but as Preston High's top student. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Lane began, "today we honor a student who did not just rise to meet the standard, but challenged the very system that defines it." Rayna blinked, tears pressing against the backs of her eyes. A student who reminded us that justice isn't always loud, but it is always necessary. Our 2025 valedictorian, Rayna Holloway. The applause was instant and thunderous. Students rose. Parents cheered. A few staff members wept quietly. Rayna stood slowly, her legs stiff, heart thudding so loud she could barely hear the crowd. The walk to the podium felt endless. Every step carried the weight of every fight, every denial, every night she doubted herself, but refused to back down. And then she was there, behind the mic, facing the crowd, the cameras, and the country watching live. She took a long breath. "I want to start by saying something simple," she began. "Thank you." The crowd hushed instantly, not just for this moment, but for the ones that came before it. The ones no one clapped for. The ones where I stood alone. She paused, grounding herself. "There was a time not long ago when I didn't believe this day would come. Not because I didn't work for it, but because the road to it wasn't built for someone like me." Her voice, soft but unwavering, cut through the speakers. "I've been called a disruptor, a problem, a threat. But the truth is, I was just tired of being quiet." People leaned forward in their seats. The noise disappeared. For too long, success in schools like ours has depended on silence. On students of color knowing their place. On teachers not asking questions. On systems protecting comfort over fairness. I didn't come here to punish anyone. I came here to say our voices matter. Rayna's eyes scanned the crowd. She saw her mother hand over her mouth, Malik clapping furiously beside her. She saw Mr. Ellison standing still, head bowed in humble reflection. I was suspended for telling the truth, and I was told that truth would cost me everything. But here I am. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "I'm not standing here because I was perfect. I'm standing here because I was honest. Because I refused to accept invisibility as normal. Because I believed that one voice backed by truth could be enough to shake a room built to ignore it." She looked directly into the nearest camera lens, speaking now to more than just Preston. "Wherever you are, whoever you are, if you've ever been silenced, erased, overlooked, I want you to know you don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to be chosen to matter. And you don't need permission to speak truth to power." The wind shifted slightly, fluttering the edges of her speech papers. But she didn't need to read anymore. "Today, I graduate not just from a school, but from a silence I didn't choose. And I leave behind a system a little louder, a little braver, and a lot more honest." A single tear slipped down her cheek. "We can't fix everything at once, but we can choose to stop pretending it isn't broken." She stepped back. The crowd rose before she even reached the last word. The applause was no longer polite. It was thunderous, aching, necessary. Even the critics clapped. Even the ones who once signed anonymous notes. Even the ones who hadn't believed. Until now. As Rayna walked off the stage, heart pounding, she felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. Not as a burden, but as a gift. She reached the end of the ramp, trying to steady herself. That's when she saw it. A man in a gray suit approached her with a quiet nod. He handed her a slim white envelope and disappeared back into the crowd. The front of it bore the seal of the National Civil Rights Education Alliance. Rayna opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter, printed on heavy parchment, with 3 simple paragraphs. "Dear Ms. Holloway, your work in transforming Preston High has reached national attention. Your courage has not only inspired students but has reshaped policy discussions in classrooms across the country. We would like to formally invite you to join our Youth Justice Fellowship in Washington, D.C. This program is awarded to one student per year, an advocate who embodies the future of civil rights and education. We believe that student is you. At the bottom was a handwritten note. Your voice changed a school. We believe it can change the nation. Rayna's eyes welled again. Not from shock, but from recognition, from being seen. She held the letter to her chest as the crowd swarmed her, teachers, friends, students from lower grades all chanting her name. But in her mind, one voice whispered louder than the rest. The voice of the girl who once sat silently in the front row, straight-A student, always overlooked. You did it. But the journey wasn't ending here. Because even as the cheers echoed through the field, Rayna glanced down at her phone one last time. Another message had just come in. From the Department of Education. Subject: advisory seat nomination. Federal Civil Rights Review Panel. Rayna's hands trembled. One voice had sparked a classroom. That classroom had sparked a movement. And now, the nation was listening. But as she walked off stage, a letter from a national civil rights organization was waiting in her locker, with a life-changing invitation inside. If you've ever felt overlooked, unheard, or erased, this story was for you, because silence isn't neutral, and justice doesn't come by waiting. It comes when someone dares to speak, even when their voice shakes. Type yes if you believe one voice can change everything. Subscribe if Rayna's fight broke your heart, but gave you hope. The air was thick with June warmth, the sun resting heavy over the football field where rows of white folding chairs faced a stage draped in navy and gold. Preston High's class of seniors sat shoulder to shoulder in caps and gowns, fanning themselves, exchanging glances, waiting for the moment that was supposed to belong to them all, but somehow undeniably now revolved around one. Rayna Holloway. Her name had become more than just a student ID or a name roll call. It had become a symbol, a question, a reckoning. And now, finally, it was etched into the valedictorian plaque, engraved beneath the school's banner for all to see. A title they once denied her, one she now held without apology. Is this really happening? Mia whispered beside her, as the principal, Dr. Lane, approached the podium with a wide smile. Rayna gave a soft nod, barely able to breathe. Her name was about to be called. Not as a protester, not as a problem, but as Preston High's top student. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Lane began. Today we honor a student who did not just rise to meet the standard, but challenged the very system that defines it. Rayna blinked, tears pressing against the backs of her eyes. A student who reminded us that justice isn't always loud, but it is always necessary. Our 2025 valedictorian, Rayna Holloway. The applause was instant and thunderous. Students rose, parents cheered. A few staff members wept quietly. Rayna stood slowly, her legs stiff, heart thudding so loud she could barely hear the crowd. The walk to the podium felt endless. Every step carried the weight of every fight, every denial, every night she doubted herself but refused to back down. And then she was there, behind the mic, facing the crowd, the cameras, and the country watching live. She took a long breath. I want to start by saying something simple, she began. Thank you. The crowd hushed instantly. Not just for this moment, but for the ones that came before it. The ones no one clapped for. The ones where I stood alone. She paused, grounding herself. There was a time not long ago when I didn't believe this day would come. Not because I didn't work for it, but because the road to it wasn't built for someone like me. Her voice, soft but unwavering, cut through the speakers. I've been called a disruptor, a problem, a threat. But the truth is, I was just tired of being quiet. People leaned forward in their seats. The noise disappeared. For too long, success in schools like ours has depended on silence. On students of color knowing their place. On teachers not asking questions. On systems protecting comfort over fairness. I didn't come here to punish anyone. I came here to say our voices matter. Rayna's eyes scanned the crowd. She saw her mother, hand over her mouth, Malik clapping furiously beside her. She saw Mr. Ellison, standing still, head bowed in humble reflection. I was suspended for telling the truth, and I was told that truth would cost me everything. But here I am. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I'm not standing here because I was perfect. I'm standing here because I was honest. Because I refused to accept invisibility as normal. Because I believed that one voice backed by truth could be enough to shake a room built to ignore it. She looked directly into the nearest camera lens, speaking now to more than just Preston. Wherever you are, whoever you are, if you've ever been silenced, erased, overlooked, I want you to know, you don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to be chosen to matter. And you don't need permission to speak truth to power. The wind shifted slightly, fluttering the edges of her speech papers. But she didn't need to read anymore. Today I graduate not just from a school but from a silence I didn't choose. And I leave behind a system a little louder, a little braver, and a lot more honest. A single tear slipped down her cheek. We can't fix everything at once, but we can choose to stop pretending it isn't broken. She stepped back. The crowd rose before she even reached the last word. The applause was no longer polite. It was thunderous, aching, necessary. Even the critics clapped, even the ones who once signed anonymous notes, even the ones who hadn't believed, until now. As Rayna walked off the stage, heart pounding, she felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders, not as a burden, but as a gift. She reached the end of the ramp, trying to steady herself. That's when she saw it. A man in a gray suit approached her with a quiet nod. He handed her a slim white envelope and disappeared back into the crowd. The front of it bore the seal of the National Civil Rights Education Alliance. Rayna opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter, printed on heavy parchment, with 3 simple paragraphs. Dear Miss Holloway, your work in transforming Preston High has reached national attention. Your courage has not only inspired students but has reshaped policy discussions in classrooms across the country. We would like to formally invite you to join our Youth Justice Fellowship in Washington, D.C. This program is awarded to 1 student per year, an advocate who embodies the future of civil rights in education. We believe that student is you. At the bottom was a handwritten note. Your voice changed a school. We believe it can change the nation. Rayna's eyes welled again, not from shock, but from recognition, from being seen. She held the letter to her chest as the crowd swarmed her. Teachers, friends, students from lower grades all chanting her name. But in her mind, one voice whispered louder than the rest. The voice of the girl who once sat silently in the front row. Straight A student. Always overlooked. You did it. But the journey wasn't ending here. Because even as the cheers echoed through the field, Rayna glanced down at her phone one last time. Another message had just come in. From the Department of Education. Subject advisory seat nomination. Federal Civil Rights Review Panel. Rayna's hands trembled. One voice had sparked a classroom. That classroom had sparked a movement. And now, the nation was listening. But as she walked off stage, a letter from a national civil rights organization was waiting in her locker, with a life-changing invitation inside. If you've ever felt overlooked, unheard, or erased, this story was for you. Because silence isn't neutral, and justice doesn't come by waiting. It comes when someone dares to speak, even when their voice shakes. Type yes if you believe one voice can change everything. Subscribe if Rayna's fight broke your heart, but gave you hope. The air was thick with June warmth, the sun resting heavy over the football field, where rows of white folding chairs faced a stage draped in navy and gold. Preston High's class of seniors sat shoulder to shoulder in caps and gowns, fanning themselves, exchanging glances, waiting for the moment that was supposed to belong to them all, but somehow undeniably, now revolved around one. Rayna Holloway. Her name had become more than just a student ID or a name roll call. It had become a symbol, a question, a reckoning. And now, finally, it was etched into the valedictorian plaque, engraved beneath the school's banner for all to see. A title they once denied her, one she now held without apology. Is this really happening? Mia whispered beside her as the principal, Dr. Lane, approached the podium with a wide smile. Rayna gave a soft nod, barely able to breathe. Her name was about to be called, not as a protester, not as a problem, but as Preston High's top student. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Lane began, today we honor a student who did not just rise to meet the standard, but challenged the very system that defines it. Rayna blinked, tears pressing against the backs of her eyes. A student who reminded us that justice isn't always loud, but it is always necessary. Our 2025 valedictorian, Rayna Holloway. The applause was instant and thunderous. Students rose. Parents cheered. A few staff members wept quietly. Rayna stood slowly, her legs stiff, heart thudding so loud she could barely hear the crowd. The walk to the podium felt endless. Every step carried the weight of every fight, every denial, every night she doubted herself but refused to back down. And then she was there, behind the mic, facing the crowd, the cameras and the country watching live. She took a long breath. "I want to start by saying something simple," she began. "Thank you." The crowd hushed instantly. Not just for this moment, but for the ones that came before it. The ones no one clapped for. The ones where I stood alone. She paused, grounding herself. "There was a time not long ago when I didn't believe this day would come. Not because I didn't work for it, but because the road to it wasn't built for someone like me." Her voice, soft but unwavering, cut through the speakers. "I've been called a disruptor. A problem. A threat. But the truth is, I was just tired of being quiet." People leaned forward in their seats. The noise disappeared. For too long, success in schools like ours has depended on silence. On students of color knowing their place. On teachers not asking questions. On systems protecting comfort over fairness. I didn't come here to punish anyone. I came here to say, our voices matter. Rayna's eyes scanned the crowd. She saw her mother, hand over her mouth, Malik clapping furiously beside her. She saw Mr. Ellison standing still, head bowed in humble reflection. I was suspended for telling the truth, and I was told that truth would cost me everything. But here I am. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I'm not standing here because I was perfect. I'm standing here because I was honest. Because I refused to accept invisibility as normal. Because I believed that one voice backed by truth could be enough to shake a room built to ignore it. She looked directly into the nearest camera lens, speaking now to more than just Preston. Wherever you are, whoever you are, if you've ever been silenced, erased, overlooked, I want you to know, you don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to be chosen to matter. And you don't need permission to speak truth to power. The wind shifted slightly, fluttering the edges of her speech papers. But she didn't need to read anymore. Today I graduate, not just from a school, but from a silence I didn't choose. And I leave behind a system a little louder, a little braver, and a lot more honest. A single tear slipped down her cheek. We can't fix everything at once, but we can choose to stop pretending it isn't broken. She stepped back. The crowd rose before she even reached the last word. The applause was no longer polite. It was thunderous, aching, necessary. Even the critics clapped. Even the ones who once signed anonymous notes. Even the ones who hadn't believed, until now. As Rayna walked off the stage, heart pounding, she felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. Not as a burden, but as a gift. She reached the end of the ramp, trying to steady herself. That's when she saw it. A man in a gray suit approached her with a quiet nod. He handed her a slim white envelope and disappeared back into the crowd. The front of it bore the seal of the National Civil Rights Education Alliance. Rayna opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter printed on heavy parchment, with 3 simple paragraphs. Dear Ms. Holloway, your work in transforming Preston High has reached national attention. Your courage has not only inspired students, but has reshaped policy discussions in classrooms across the country. We would like to formally invite you to join our Youth Justice Fellowship in Washington, D.C. This program is awarded to 1 student per year, an advocate who embodies the future of civil rights in education. We believe that student is you. At the bottom was a handwritten note. Your voice changed a school. We believe it can change the nation. Rayna's eyes welled again. Not from shock, but from recognition, from being seen. She held the letter to her chest as the crowd swarmed her, teachers, friends, students from lower grades, all chanting her name. But in her mind, one voice whispered louder than the rest. The voice of the girl who once sat silently in the front row, straight-A student, always overlooked. You did it. But the journey wasn't ending here. Because even as the cheers echoed through the field, Rayna glanced down at her phone one last time. Another message had just come in, from the Department of Education. Subject Advisory Seat Nomination. Federal Civil Rights Review Panel. Rayna's hands trembled. One voice had sparked a classroom. That classroom had sparked a movement, and now the nation was listening. But as she walked off stage, a letter from a national civil rights organization was waiting in her locker, with a life-changing invitation inside. If you've ever felt overlooked, unheard, or erased, this story was for you. Because silence isn't neutral, and justice doesn't come by waiting. It comes when someone dares to speak, even when their voice shakes. Type yes if you believe one voice can change everything. Subscribe if Rayna's fight broke your heart, but gave you hope.